The fun life of a troll in the Marvel Universe. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 326, Meeting an Old Friend. Although the location is not right. How to say it? Although Sherlock's posture is very strange, and his actions seem a bit mentally abnormal, Sherlock is definitely the safest one in the entire factory. Sherlock, who knows the power of space, will never touch those spaces that look abnormal at will, even if this abnormal space will not actually produce any bad consequences. After spending a full half an hour, Sherlock finally moved himself into the factory building with a step that was as if he was a patient with cerebral thrombosis. Originally, Sherlock thought that, after entering the factory building, even if it was done, at most he would just howl to determine Jane's location. But what Sherlock didn't expect was that he didn't see Jane after entering the factory. However, although he didn't see Jane, Sherlock still saw a few familiar figures. Yes, it was Jane's good friend Daisy Louise. At this time, Daisy was leading two young men who were not much different from Sherlock to play happily in the open space in the middle of the factory, because they found a fun place in the factory. In the middle of the factory, there is a place that is like Sherlock's double portal, which can keep an object in free fall. At this time, Daisy was discussing with two young men what the reason was, while watching an empty bottle falling in the middle. Sherlock's mouth twitched when he saw the behavior of the three people. Although the three people looked like they were discussing academics at the edge of the factory, they looked like they were having a peaceful time. But in Sherlock's eyes, these three people were actually not much different from standing on the edge of the abyss and chatting and laughing. Before Sherlock could figure out how to explain the current situation to these three fearless people, he told them not to act rashly. One of the three people, who seemed to have a special relationship with Daisy, stepped forward and caught the empty bottle that had been in free fall. With the boy's action, Sherlock's eyelids jumped fiercely. It seemed that the boy's action stimulated the other boy. The other boy seemed to want to try out what it felt like to play this infinite loop of free fall, and threw the things in his hand out. Unfortunately, this time, the free fall did not occur. The things thrown by the young man fell into an unknown space. The three waited for a long time, but did not see anything falling from above. The next second, the three people seemed to react to something, and began to constantly denounce the young man who threw the things, because the young man just threw out the car keys of the car they took when they came. Although in their opinion, it was just the car keys that fell into the unknown space and disappeared without a trace. But in Sherlock's perception, the poor car keys were directly shattered by the power of space after entering the crack of the space. It was shattered to such an extent that not even the residue was left, and it turned directly into dust. Moreover, the dust did not disappear, but fell from above in a panic like the empty bottle. However, due to the environment and light, ordinary people could not notice the dust falling down. So in the perception of the three people, the car keys seemed to disappear out of thin air. Looking at the various behaviors of these three fools, Sherlock finally made up his mind to go over and warn them. After all, according to the way these three fools played, they might really kill themselves. Daisy, listen to me. All three of you stop moving. Listen to my command. It's very dangerous here. Sherlock yelled at the moment he made the decision, making sure the three of them stopped fighting immediately. In fact, Sherlock was very successful. The moment Sherlock's voice appeared, the three of them stopped fighting immediately, and Daisy looked in the direction of the voice. After seeing Sherlock's figure, Daisy's face was obviously full of joy. But thinking of Sherlock's warning, Daisy still chose to believe this comrade who once stood on the same front with her in the Single Dog Alliance. At Daisy's call, the three of them immediately stood still, as if they had cast a spell to freeze them, and their faces were full of anxiety and fear. After all, although the three of them knew that there was something wrong with the space here, they didn't know where the danger was, and often only the unknown was the most frightening. Seeing that the three of them stopped moving, Sherlock thought for a long time about how to get the three of them to his side safely. Finally, Sherlock thought of a solution that was not a solution. With a twist of his wrist, the famous magic wand suddenly appeared in Sherlock's hand. In the shocked, excited, and incomprehensible eyes of the three people, Sherlock took the magic wand in reverse and put the tip of the magic wand to his mouth. Then, as if blowing a trumpet, he blew out a lot of golden, shiny dust-like things from the bottom of the magic wand in one breath. These golden, shiny dust floated in the air and soon gradually formed several irregular, constantly changing geometric shapes. This was Sherlock's idea of a solution that was not a solution. Use the development spell to wrap up the dangerous place and serve as a warning to the three fools to ensure that the three fools can walk out safely. When Sherlock's development spell was completed, the three people saw that one of the young men's feet had half stepped into the space geometry marked by the development spell. Be careful not to touch the things marked with shiny powder. Be careful and move slowly towards me. With Sherlock's shouting, at this moment, the three people realized how dangerous their behavior was just now. It was just dancing at the gate of hell and playing flash in front of the king of hell. This time, the three people didn't dare to play around anymore. They carefully moved themselves to Sherlock's side with their brains not fully developed and their bodies not fully developed, just like Sherlock. It wasn't until the three of them arrived at Sherlock's side that Daisy seemed to be relieved and slapped Sherlock's shoulder hard. Young man, long time no see. What's the matter? Are you looking for me because you miss my beauty? Hearing Daisy's unreliable greeting, Sherlock rolled his eyes in annoyance. Although he knew that this guy had just experienced the brink of life and death and was trying to relieve the tension in his heart, out of instinct, Sherlock couldn't help but directly retorted. Stop being so narcissistic. I was asked by Jane's quantum superposition boyfriend to come here to act as a peacemaker. Don't let Jane's quantum superposition boyfriend collapse directly into an ex-boyfriend. By the way, where's Jane? Chapter 327, Disappearance of Jane. Before Sherlock mentioned Jane, no one would have reacted. When Sherlock mentioned Jane, the pretense of being relaxed on Daisy's face suddenly turned into the same panic as a soldier who forgot to pick up his own child from school. OSHXT. OSHXT. Hurry up. Sherlock, hurry up. Jane went to the second floor of the construction site. Hurry up to save Jane. The stairs are over there. Daisy made a sharp explosion and pointed out the direction of the stairs to the second floor to Sherlock. Sherlock did not hesitate, looked at Daisy and the two young men beside Daisy and comforted her. It's safe here. You stay here and don't move. I'll go buy an orange. Ugh, I'll pick up Jane and come back. Sherlock almost instinctively used the very popular backview stalk in his lifetime, but halfway through he remembered that this was the home of Eagle Source, and the people here would not imitate ZHU's Iking's backview, so he changed his words. As expected, neither Daisy nor the two young men understood Sherlock's joke. Sherlock could only sigh alone at the boredom that no one understood, and then he left again with the same actions as those of a man who didn't recognize his relatives, had an underdeveloped brain, and had a completely underdeveloped cerebellum. Because Sherlock could sense the difference in the space, he didn't use the apparition spell when he left, so his actions looked a bit crazy. Young man 1, I should say, did we come here like this just now? By the way, do you think this person is the wizard in the Battle of New York? Young man 2, I don't know if it is true, but it looks a bit abnormal. But I don't think this wand is fake. After the two young men finished speaking, they turned their eyes to Daisy, who was standing between them. Daisy, I don't know if it's normal or not, but it's definitely silly and danger. Also, don't look at me like that. I don't know. But to be honest, I don't think it's fake. After Daisy finished speaking, the three looked at each other, and then the three of them tacitly shut up and didn't speak. The three of them made up their minds that no matter what, they would never mention this bad black history in the future. Although the black history would not be mentioned, the three of them had some different little thoughts in their hearts. After all, as a member of the Eagle Source family, who can not like a wizard who can fight, resist and do logistics, the two young men have now begun to think about what posture they should use to ask for an autographed photo later. Sherlock didn't know about Daisy's little theater, because now Sherlock has no energy to consider other things. The closer he is to the position of Jane mentioned by Daisy, the more chaotic the space around him becomes. Various space cracks, various space traps, and space cycles can be said to emerge in an endless stream. There are even some very secret spaces. Even if Sherlock's perception is fully open, he will be caught from time to time. So far, Sherlock has found himself walking back 5 or 6 meters 3 times. But at least hard work pays off. After going through 81 difficulties, Sherlock finally saw Jane. It can only be said that Jane is worthy of being the son of the version. Sherlock has been cautious and worked hard all the way, but in Jane's case, it seems that she has arrived here casually. Sherlock seems to be a zombie with an underdeveloped cerebellum. He walks as he pleases, as if the brain and consciousness have just tamed the body and limbs. But look at Jane, holding a testing instrument, walking as she pleases. Although she was cautious in the process and bumped into many chaotic spaces along the way, she was fine. Sherlock's face began to twist. Although Sherlock was jealous of the separation of the plasmosphere and the wall, as a friend, Sherlock was still very reliable. As soon as he found Jane, Sherlock called Jane. "Jane, don't move. Stand there and don't move." As Sherlock roared, Jane naturally saw Sherlock, who was crawling on the ground in the dark, with his face twisted, because of the excessive pressure on his body's flexibility. Although he was very familiar with Sherlock, to be honest, with Sherlock's current appearance, even Jane was not sure whether the strange creature in front of him was Sherlock himself. Caught off guard, Jane almost instinctively took a step back, but this step caused irreversible consequences. As Jane stepped back and stepped on the ground, a huge suction force came from behind Jane, just like pain's universal heaven attraction. Jane didn't even have time to resist before being directly absorbed into the space crack by this suction force and disappeared. Jane. Sherlock only had time to call out Jane's name, and Jane disappeared alive in front of his eyes. Strangely enough, the moment Jane disappeared, the originally chaotic space in the factory almost immediately returned to its original state. Even if Sherlock didn't say it, no one could feel what had just happened here. Sherlock's face changed drastically when he felt that the situation was not good. He didn't care whether it was dangerous or not. He hurriedly got up from the ground and ran to the place where Jane disappeared just now to explore. After finding nothing, Sherlock could only grit his teeth and turn around to run towards Daisy and the others. At this time, Sherlock's first reaction was to find someone. The current situation was obviously not something Sherlock could handle. God knows where the damn reality gem was hidden by Odin's biological father. So Sherlock's first thought now was to run to the open space to call Heimdall. When seeing Sherlock running back in a hurry, Daisy and the other two were surprised. They took a look at the detector in their hands and found that everything was normal. Then they showed a look of understanding. Out of blind trust in the wizard, the three thought that Sherlock had solved the chaotic space here. "Sherlock, you." Daisy was interrupted by Sherlock just as she opened her mouth. "It's not me." Jane was sucked away by the space turbulence. "I can't find Jane. Now the space is stable. Come out with me. Go report to Carlson. I'm going to find someone to rescue Jane," Sherlock shouted while running. When Sherlock's voice fell, Sherlock had already run past the three people like a gust of wind. The three people stood in the wind brought by Sherlock for a long time, and then they realized what Sherlock had just shouted. "What? Jane disappeared?" Asterisk. 3 terrified shouts rang out at the same time. After the three people looked at each other, they made the same action as Sherlock, threw their arms, and started to run wildly outside. Chapter 328 I wish all lovers in the world can eventually become siblings. The four of them were running all the way. Although Sherlock had spent a lot of effort when he came in, and his forward posture was somewhat indistinguishable from that of a human or an animal, it didn't take them long to run out after the space and the entire area returned to normal. Sherlock was the first to run to the open space outside, and he didn't care what the men in black suits who were still standing on the open space were thinking. He looked up at the empty blue sky and started yelling at the top of his lungs. "Heimdall, tell Thor to come quickly, Jane is missing." Before Sherlock finished speaking, he heard a surprised female voice behind him. "Jane." Sherlock looked in the direction where the voice came from. Jane, who had been sucked into the space crack, had now appeared in the middle of the entire venue and was unconscious. Because Daisy and the two young men rushed out after Sherlock, when Sherlock yelled at the sky, the three of them had just rushed out of the factory building. But before they could run a few steps, Jane suddenly appeared in the middle of the open space, as if there was no transition set during editing. In the previous frame, there was still an empty space, and in the next second, Jane appeared peacefully in the middle of the open space. As Jane's best friend, when Daisy saw Jane lying in such a peaceful posture in the open space, all kinds of bad thoughts immediately emerged in her head uncontrollably. She turned around and rushed to Jane lying on the ground without any hesitation. The two young men who had been following Daisy followed closely behind, and the three of them helped Jane up from the ground. After Sherlock turned around and saw Jane's figure, he did not hesitate too much and turned around and ran in Jane's direction. However, after running only a short distance, Sherlock immediately stopped. The reason is very simple. As Sherlock approaches, a black and red mist begins to appear on Jane's body uncontrollably. This black and red mist seems to be conscious. It ignores Daisy and the other two who are startled by the sudden change beside Jane and tries to reach Sherlock. Since the appearance of the black mist, although Jane has not woken up yet, her expression has begun to become extremely painful. Such a change made Daisy and the other two and Sherlock confused. Not to mention Sherlock and the others, even the black suits who have been standing on the periphery showed a look of doubt. Out of a cautious attitude, Sherlock also experimented. The closer Sherlock and Jane are, the thicker the black mist on Jane's body, and the more painful Jane's expression. But as long as Sherlock and Jane keep a certain distance, the black mist on Jane will gradually twist and disappear, and finally return to Jane's body. Looking at this extremely outrageous scene in front of him, Sherlock was completely dumbfounded. What is the situation with this mother's reality gem? Why is it divided into people? If the situation wasn't wrong now, Sherlock wouldn't be sure what was going on. Sherlock really wanted to stand in front of the reality gem and grab its collar to ask if it discriminated against him and why it was staring at him. In fact, Sherlock was right. Compared to Jane, the reality gem really liked Sherlock more. All the abnormalities in the space that Sherlock encountered when he approached the factory were caused by the reality gem trying to pull Sherlock into the space that sealed it. But unfortunately, Sherlock, the sixth, relied on his ability to sense the abnormalities in the space and didn't let the reality gem do what it wanted. And what everyone present didn't know was that it wasn't Sherlock who saw the factory as dangerous, but the factory would become dangerous only after Sherlock walked into the factory. The reason why those black suits and Daisy and the other two seemed dangerous to Sherlock was actually the difficulty of the reality gem to actively adjust after sensing Sherlock's approach. In such a weird situation, let alone Daisy and the other two, even the knowledgeable Sherlock didn't know what to do. In the end, Sherlock could only temporarily stay away from Jane and then hold his head in the distance and start thinking. Sherlock was not sure if Heimdall could hear his call just now. If Heimdall could not hear it, then the only person who could handle this strange situation in the whole world was the bald boss Ancient One. But Sherlock was really nervous to face Ancient One. It was not that the overwhelming combat power made Sherlock feel scared, but simply because of the Riddler. Putting aside the characteristics of the Riddler, Sherlock was also very nervous about the Time Stone. Although Sherlock's HP magic was very strange in the Marvel world, some of his magic had even touched the level of rules. But looking at the entire HP, the only thing that could be linked to time was the time converter. Compared with the Time Stone, the time converter was an unstable scum. Looking at how the novice Strange could transform into a negotiator with the help of the Time Stone, Sherlock did not believe that Ancient One, who had mastered the Time Stone for hundreds of years, was worse than Strange in playing with the Time Stone. Maybe in front of Guyi, no matter who it is, the color of today's pants will not escape Guyi's eyes. This is what makes Sherlock feel trembling. No one wants others to know the color of their pants, no one. Just when Sherlock was still holding his head and hesitating whether to take Jane to find Guyi, a colorful beam of light from the sky instantly fell on the open space next to Sherlock. With the loud sound of the rainbow bridge landing, Jane on the other side also woke up slowly. After the light of the rainbow bridge disappeared, Thor, holding the meow meow hammer, hurried out of the rainbow bridge. This bastard didn't even look at Sherlock and ran straight to Jane, who was sitting on the ground with the help of everyone. After seeing Thor's figure, Jane tried hard to pull the people around her to stand up. When Thor approached, she went up and slapped Thor in the face. The force was so great and the sound was so loud that even Sherlock, who was standing far away, was stunned. Because of the distance, Sherlock couldn't hear what Thor said to Jane. Thor seemed to say a few words, and then Jane gave Thor a super loud smack. Sherlock was so dumbfounded, God knows what happened over there. Sherlock was like a rabbit in a melon field, who couldn't eat the melons, jumping up and down anxiously. God knows how much damage it is to have melons, but not be able to eat them for a rabbit who loves to watch the fun. Before Sherlock could figure out what was going on with the two big fights, Jane and Thor actually started to eat them again. Seeing such a dog food scene, Sherlock could only be sure of one thing, that is, Thor successfully collapsed his quantum superposition state into the boyfriend state. Although this scene is beautiful, out of the anger of a single dog, he still has to scold. Sherlock, who suffered 10,000 points of critical damage, silently spit in the corner. Pooh, damn sour smell. Chapter 329 The Second War Between Sherlock and Saul. It should be a beautiful thing to have a CP. After all, the scene just now has a taste of overbearing literature. Thor, the overbearing prince of Asgard, fell in love with Jane, a poor girl from Earth, despite his parents' opposition. When Jane was in danger, he came to Earth privately to find true love despite his parents' ban. After the two people who had been separated for a long time met, Jane cried and gave Thor two big fights, accusing the overbearing prince of leaving without saying goodbye, and accusing the overbearing prince of his mistakes. Then the overbearing prince kissed the lover in his arms very strongly. The two kissed to break their grudges, reconciled, and began a vigorous love again. This scene is a complete dimensionality reduction strike for Eaglesource. How can Eaglesource, who has not experienced the bombardment of video short dramas, refuse such a typical overbearing plot? You can see the expressions of Daisy and the other two behind the two people. Now Daisy and the other three have an expression of hitting the bump, and the faces of one woman and two men are full of aunt smiles. But it is not the case for Sherlock. After experiencing the short dramas of the crook-mouthed Dragon King, the overbearing president, the grudges of the rich, the true and false daughters, the counterattack of the loser, the ups and downs of the officialdom in the previous life, Sherlock felt uncomfortable watching Thor and Jean, who were playing the overbearing president plot at this time. It was the kind of embarrassment of digging the ground with your toes, and there was a feeling of witnessing the absurdity of the overbearing president plot with your own eyes. Taking a step back, simply looking at the scene of Jane and Thor just now according to the CP, Sherlock also felt extremely embarrassed. After all, the most important condition for CP is that the two people have to match each other, and they have to be not too familiar with each other. After all, distance creates beauty. But look at these two people, which condition does he meet? Jane looks very similar to Natalie Portman. Both of them look cold, not to mention Thor, who even looks more like Zhu Jinjiang than the actor who played Thor in the previous life. Can you support the CP of Natalie Portman and Zhu Jinjiang? Anyway, Sherlock couldn't do it, and the most important thing was that Sherlock was forced to get involved when Thor started dating Jane. Damn it, the last time in Asgard, Thor wrote a love letter to Jane, which was written by his mother Sherlock. How can Sherlock resist this? Therefore, Sherlock looked at the interaction between the two with a look of seeing something dirty from beginning to end. Maybe because Sherlock's eyes were too glaring, Jane and Thor nibbled for a while without paying attention to others, and then found Sherlock standing 10 meters away. Out of concern for her friends and love for single dogs, Jane seemed to want to come over and say something to Sherlock. Because of the distance, Sherlock didn't know what Jane and Thor said. Jane and Thor only said a few words and then walked towards Sherlock. But before she had taken 2 steps, Jane's footsteps paused. As Jane approached, black and red mist began to emerge uncontrollably from her body, and Jane, who had stopped walking, showed an uncomfortable look on her face. Just like a sudden heart attack, Jane covered her chest all of a sudden, and with the uncontrollable black and red mist pouring out of her body, Jane knelt on one knee. Seeing that Jane was in trouble, Thor almost subconsciously threw the meow meow hammer in his hand towards the place that threatened Jane's safety. Looking at the moment, the only place that can be said to be a threat is Sherlock, who stood there in a daze and didn't have time to say anything to stop Jane. Sherlock almost watched Thor throw the meow meow hammer towards him, and he didn't feel good at all. Damn it, you actually swung the hammer at me? You are so close to Jane. Even if you reach out and pull it, it will be fine. But you actually swung the hammer at me? What a peerless jerk who values love over friendship. Thor. I. Knock. Exclamation mark. You. Man. Mother. Of course, according to the speed of the meow meow hammer, although Sherlock's roar in his head was deafening, he had no time to convert the roar in his head into sound waves. The strong fighting quality prompted Sherlock to take out the wand in the library almost subconsciously and start the apparition. With a crackling sound of space distortion, Sherlock's figure disappeared on the root of the meow meow hammer. When Sherlock appeared again, he was already on the other side. Of course, Sherlock was not a fool, and he still kept a certain safe distance from Jane. With Sherlock's departure, the abnormality on Jane's body disappeared in an instant, as if nothing had happened. Jane also returned to normal and stood up, looking at Sherlock with a puzzled look. And Thor seemed to have reacted to what stupid thing he had done just now. The meow meow hammer was summoned back by Thor's hand halfway through its flight. Although it seems like a long time has passed when written down. In fact, everything happened in just a few breaths. Although this incident did not cause any irreversible consequences, Sherlock's face was still terribly dark. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Sherlock is going to really feel what it means to catch the meow meow hammer with his face. The last time someone caught the meow meow hammer with his face was Thor, who just threw the hammer. But that meow meow hammer was just a fake after all. That thing is still in Sherlock's library and is collected by Sherlock. Now Thor actually wants to use the real meow meow hammer to replicate what Sherlock did to Thor when he was in New Mexico. This is intolerable. Even if the uncle can tolerate it, the aunt can't. Exclamation mark. Sherlock tried hard to pull up the corners of his mouth, showing Jane a twisted smile, trying to make his tone a little more kind. Jane, can you please stay 10 meters away from your dear boyfriend and keep this safe distance? I have something to say to our Asgard prince. Dear Thor. Although Sherlock's tone was very kind, it sounded so kind to Jane. Coupled with Sherlock's eyes that looked like he was about to eat Thor when he said this, Jane couldn't refuse Sherlock at all. Rubbing the goosebumps on her body caused by Sherlock's tone just now, Jane, under Thor's eyes looking at her for help, pulled Daisy and the other two away without any psychological burden. Not to mention 10 meters, it was 30 meters. Seeing that Jean had left a safe distance for herself, Sherlock's smile became more and more brilliant, and the magic wand in Sherlock's hand turned up and down flexibly. Sherlock still maintained the kind tone just now to attract Thor's attention from Jane to himself. Seeing Thor's eyes looking at him, Sherlock's face began to twist rapidly. I knock your mom. You die. You. Chapter 330. Spirited Young Man. Thor. Facts have proved that, as long as a venue is sufficient and the wizard's displacement skills are good enough, the warrior will never be able to beat the wizard. Just flying a kite is enough to wear the warrior to death. Although Sherlock was pressed to the ground by Thor many times at the door of the Rainbow Bridge in Asgard, this time, when Sherlock took out his wand, Thor was beaten by Sherlock in a miserable way. When Sherlock finally got rid of his anger and put away his wand, Thor could no longer be called a human. It would be more appropriate to call him a humanoid creature. Sherlock can be said to have tried all the evil spells, except the torture spell on Thor. Of course, the most important ones are the prank spells. Now Thor is hung upside down in the air, and his fat and long tongue is pulled out of his mouth, passing over the front teeth that are straight to the sky and Thor's nose and forehead, to drag on the ground. The legs were locked tightly together by Sherlock's magic, pointing straight to the sky, as if dancing the little swan, but the shoes on the feet were a bit out of place, not ballet shoes, but yellow Chelsea boots. The two arms that could run horses were fixed into a strange shape by Sherlock's magic. Even out of some unknown bad taste, Sherlock forced Thor to count 6 with one hand and 7 with the other. Of course, Thor's clothes did not escape Sherlock's magic. The originally majestic armor cape has now begun to develop in a strange direction. There are 6 things like breastplates on Thor's upper body armor. At this time, the originally round breastplates have become the shape of Hello Kitty. Even the prismatic armor on the arms has become the shape of a cat. With the blessing of Sherlock's transformation, it is actually flashing a strange pink metallic light. The originally red cloak began to flash red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple under Sherlock's magic, highlighting the style of a modified car in the urban-rural junction. Even Thor's originally handsome long hair was turned into Chun-Li's same bun by Sherlock's magic. Under Sherlock's control, it highlights a combination of local and foreign, weird, and absurd. Oh, by the way, Sherlock didn't let go of the Meow Meow hammer. Of course, if you want Sherlock to pick up the Meow Meow hammer, that's bullshit, but it doesn't prevent Sherlock from using magic to control Thor to take a tongue hanging on the ground and tie the handle of the Meow Meow hammer on the ground, swinging the Meow Meow hammer through Thor's tongue. After all, strictly speaking, even the tongue is Thor himself, isn't it? But Sherlock has opened his eyes. It's the first time in his 2 lives that a hammer can accurately convey an emotion called disgust. Jane, Daisy and the other 4 people standing on the other side were also not feeling well. Daisy didn't care. At this time, she and the 2 young men were rolling on the ground with their arms around their stomachs and laughing. Jane was very uncomfortable being caught in the middle. You can say it's funny, but the joke is about her boyfriend. If you don't want to laugh, Thor's weird look of a rural-urban junction is really funny. Of course, Sherlock is not a devil. After making fun of Thor for a while, he put Thor down from mid-air. Of course, putting him down is putting him down, but Sherlock's look of a rural-urban junction did not help Thor recover. Thor himself, although in a mess, still did not recognize the wand in Sherlock's hand. His 2 little eyes stared at Sherlock. Thor still couldn't figure it out. He was able to repeatedly press Sherlock to the ground last time. How could this guy become so powerful after a few days of absence? Although he didn't fight back strongly just now, he couldn't deny that Sherlock could beat him. But to be honest, Thor felt that, apart from the big tongue and big buck teeth, he was still very handsome, and he had a feeling of being the most dazzling. Because he couldn't get close to Jane, it wasn't a good idea to communicate by shouting. Sherlock pulled 2 walkie-talkies from those black suits and threw one to Jane. Jane also comforted him for a long time before Sherlock reluctantly calmed down and waved his wand to restore Thor to his original state. But no one noticed the regret that flashed in Thor's eyes after he was restored to his original state. Not to mention, he really liked the golden Chelsea boots, Meow Meow armor and the colorful flashing cloak that Sherlock had transformed for him. Jane also comforted Thor like an old mother, and then she and Daisy talked about the situation just now. It was not until now that Thor understood why the red and black mist appeared on Jane's body just now. As if he had noticed something wrong, Thor hugged Jan, called Sherlock, and called Heimdall to the sky. Sherlock just heard Thor calling him, and before Sherlock could figure out what was happening on the other side, the rainbow bridge had already descended. Unlike the original book, this time, Thor brought Daisy with him. When Sherlock came to his senses, Sherlock was already standing at the gate of the rainbow bridge. Seeing that Daisy was there, Thor immediately handed Jane to Daisy, walked quickly to Sherlock, and started talking to Sherlock. In fact, there was nothing. Thor was mainly worried about Jane's health. Compared with the medical conditions on Earth, the medical level of Asgard is undoubtedly much higher than that of Earth. Of course, Thor didn't know what the red and black fog was, but Thor believed that the doctors in Asgard would treat Jane well. The reason for bringing Sherlock and Daisy was that, on the one hand, Jane needed someone to take care of her. As Jane's best friend and same-sex friend, Daisy was undoubtedly the best choice. The most important thing was that during the treatment process, Daisy could also serve as Jane's spiritual pillar to provide motivation for Jane. On the other hand, since this red and black mist will emerge from Jane's body when Sherlock approaches, it proves that this unknown mist likes Sherlock very much. As Sherlock's good brother, Thor will never leave his good brother there. If there is another red and black mist like this, then according to the medical level of the Earth, if he does not rush over, will his good brother also die on the spot? Well, although Thor said it very well and cared about his emotions, Sherlock knew that this red and black mist was a legendary reality gem, and there would not be a second one in the entire universe. However, Sherlock was also very curious about why the reality gem liked him so much, and he could understand it thoroughly this time. But there was one thing that Sherlock still couldn't figure out. That is, it has been so long And Sherlock even beat Thor up just now. Didn't this guy realize that he was his comrade in arms wizard in the Battle of New York? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 331, The Infinity Stones You Can Never Look at Directly Again. After entering Asgard, Thor just said hello, and then he carried Jane in his arms all the way to the palace. Sherlock and Daisy could only whisper together and curse to vent their anger as single dogs, while trying to swing their legs to keep up with Thor's pace. In the end, Sherlock really couldn't stand it anymore. Thor was a bastard whose brain was full of muscles. He and Daisy, two mortals, would definitely not be able to outrun Thor, the devil muscle man. At that moment, Sherlock stopped walking while panting and pulled Daisy, who was about to fall to the ground. To be honest, Sherlock had never felt that the distance from the gate of the Rainbow Bridge to the Palace of Asgard would be so tiring before. Sherlock had walked it before, but he was not so tired. But Thor ran too fast. It was not only fast, but also very durable. Sherlock and Daisy had to run almost 100-meter sprint to barely keep up with Thor. Sherlock had to drag Daisy, who was just an ordinary person. It would be a miracle if Sherlock and Daisy could hold on to such a running style. Without any hesitation, Sherlock decisively took out the flying broom he had bought in his library. Although riding this thing would make people feel ashamed, compared with being exhausted to death, Sherlock still felt that shame was nothing. He decisively stepped on the broom and pulled the exhausted Daisy behind him. Sherlock controlled the broom and followed Thor slowly. You know what? This time the experience was much better. The only thing that was not a good experience was that Daisy kept twisting her body left and right to adjust her posture after she recovered from the back. As soon as Daisy adjusted her posture, Sherlock's broom would start shaking unconsciously, making it difficult to control the direction. Fortunately, the two were not moving fast and at a low altitude, so Sherlock could still keep steady. The two did not even have the slightest intention of getting off the broom when they arrived at the Palace of Asgard. They just sat on the broom and followed Thor into the medical room in the palace under everyone's gaze. When Sherlock and Daisy arrived at the medical room, Jane was already lying on a thing that looked like an operating table. Several mechanical arms around her were constantly emitting red light and scanning back and forth over Jane's body. Daisy rushed to Jane's side as soon as she jumped off Sherlock's broom, while Sherlock kept a safe distance and sat on a chair 10 meters away because he would attract the reality gem on Jane's body. After throwing the broom into his library, Sherlock lit a cigarette with a sad face, as if he couldn't understand why he was just here to be a lobbyist and could catch up with such a shit. After a while, Thor sat next to Sherlock with a sad face. Almost subconsciously, Sherlock handed Thor a cigarette. To Sherlock's surprise, Thor didn't know when he learned how to do it. He skillfully put the cigarette in his mouth, lit it, took a deep breath, and exhaled a puff of smoke with a sad face. Seeing Thor's expression, Sherlock raised his eyebrows and asked, "Not good. What did the doctor say?" The doctor can't be sure what that thing is, but there are two things that can be confirmed. First, this thing has been deeply bound to Jane's body. According to Asgard's medical level, it can be taken out of Jane's body, but the cost may not be affordable for Jane. In other words, Jane will die with a high probability. Second, this thing seems to be eroding Jane's body. If it is not taken out, Jane will die anyway. It's just a matter of time. Listening to Thor's words, Sherlock was completely dumbfounded. My goodness, why does this thing sound so familiar? Sherlock held his head and thought for a while. Then he slapped his head and remembered that this thing alcohol is so similar to something. Isn't this a tumor? If it is not taken out, it will definitely die. If it is taken out, there is a chance of recurrence and death. What the hell? So the reality gem is a big tumor? Wait, if the reality gem is a big tumor, then what are the other infinity gems? At this moment, Sherlock, who accepted the whole setting, felt that he couldn't bear to look directly at the infinity gauntlet in Thanos' hand. That's not the infinity gauntlet. Isn't that Chunchin's way of killing you? Which good person can bear the destruction of 6 big tumors? Even a titan body as strong as Thanos's, didn't he lose an arm in the end? Of course, Sherlock didn't tell Thor about these imaginary settings. In Thor's view, Sherlock just lowered his head and his face changed for a while, and then he told himself a very bold idea. What if I stand next to Jane and suck that thing out? As Sherlock's voice fell, Thor's originally worried face suddenly showed a look of hope, but at the same time, there was also a strong sadness. On one hand, there is his good brother, and on the other hand, there is his lover. No matter which aspect, Thor doesn't want them to get hurt. But Sherlock couldn't stand up to his insistence. On the one hand, Sherlock really regarded Jane as his friend, and on the other hand, Sherlock really began to be curious about this reality gem. Why do I attract the reality gem so much? I'm not the Scarlet Witch. Thor immediately went to explain the situation to the group of doctors. As doctors, whether in Asgard or on Earth, they all have a kind heart. If there is a glimmer of hope to treat the patient, this group of doctors will not give up. Soon, a very special ward was arranged by the doctors. The whole room is composed of a huge glass room. Jane will lie on the examination table in the middle of the glass room, which is the table where some small mechanical arms scanned Jane just now. But this table is different from ordinary tables. There is a closable ceiling cover above this examination table. This cover can be completely sealed to ensure that the black and red mist will not return to Jane's body after being sucked out of Jane's body by Sherlock. The plan is actually very simple. Put Jane in the glass room. Sherlock approaches Jane, and under the surveillance of the scanner, suck out the black and red mist in Jane's body, and then close the glass cover to block the black and red mist from returning to Jane's body. If the whole process goes smoothly, it may take less than half an hour. And just when everything was ready, someone no one expected came into the medical room. Odin. Chapter 332 Ethical Drama and Odin's Conjecture. Odin seemed to be extremely angry about Thor's bringing Jane and Daisy to Asgard without permission. He had a dark face since entering the medical room. However, the amazing thing was that Odin did not seem to reject Sherlock's arrival at all. All his dissatisfaction was focused on Jane and Daisy. Seeing Odin's appearance, the doctors who were originally planning to conduct the experiment naturally had to stop their work and wait for Odin to speak. Fortunately, Jane had already entered the glass room and could not hear what Odin and Thor were saying. However, even if she could not hear it, she could see that Thor and Odin had almost had a big fight. Sherlock stood there and watched this family ethics drama between father and son. Odin did not like Jane, not because of Jane's origin and life experience, but because of a very realistic problem. Jane's lifespan was too short compared to the EC who could live for more than 1,000 years. As the son of Odin and the future king of Asgard, Odin could not accept that Jane could only accompany Thor for a short 100 years. Even if Asgard's medical methods were used, human genes were limited, and the lifespan was less than 200 years at most. Odin knew how tormented it was to watch the people he loved grow old and die while he still looked young. He didn't want his son to experience such a thing at all. However, due to the communication between the father and son and Thor's love brain attack, he didn't care about Odin's deep meaning. In Thor's view, Odin was the role of the vicious father-in-law in those family ethics dramas on Earth. The father and son had a big quarrel in front of everyone, and finally Odin was so angry that he even asked the guards to directly pull Jane out and expel her. Seeing that Thor had picked up the hammer, Sherlock really didn't want to watch this uneventful drama of the rich and powerful, and took advantage of the fact that the glass door of Jane's room was not open to quietly approach Jane a little bit. As Sherlock approached, black and red mist began to spread out of Jane's body again, and the whole person began to twitch, and the instruments outside the room began to alarm frantically. Such a sudden change scared everyone in the room. Odin was very calm, but his eyes fell on Jane, who was constantly spreading black and red mist. Seeing that it was almost time, Sherlock quietly stepped back a few steps, and everything returned to calm in an instant, but Sherlock's little movements did not escape Odin's attention. However, Odin's eyes became extremely strange when he looked at Sherlock. As the king of gods, Odin personally followed his father to participate in the war, so he naturally knew what the black and red mist was. However, what Odin himself did not understand was that the other particles created by the Dark Elves would be so close to Sherlock, a native Earth child. This matter was really a bit incredible. Odin, who discovered something unusual, naturally put aside the idea of expelling Jane temporarily, waved his hand to dismiss the guards, and walked into Jane's ward with the doctors of Asgard to confirm his guess. Thousands of years of life and high status have brought Odin unparalleled knowledge. Looking at the people Sherlock knows now, no one's knowledge can surpass Odin, not even the Ancient One. After entering Jane's ward, Odin personally checked Jane's condition. Soon, Odin came to a conclusion that the essence of the so-called ether particles created by the Dark Elves is actually an infinite gem in the universe. Because Odin felt the same boundless energy of the cosmic cube on Jane. When participating in the war against the Dark Elves, Odin did not observe what the ether particles were up close because of his father, but now that the Dark Elves are sure that they can make the 9 media fall into darkness with the ether particles, it seems that only the power of the Infinity Gems can do it. However, although Odin was sure that the ether particle was an Infinity Stone, he could not determine which Infinity Stone it was. He did not make it public at the moment, but only talked about the ether particle, and did not mention the Infinity Stone. After all, the Infinity Stone is too valuable as a secret treasure in the universe. As the saying goes, money can move people's hearts, and Odin, who has lived for countless years, knows this too well. The doctor who left the room with Odin also brought bad news. That is, if Sherlock gets close, he can indeed extract the ether particles in Jane's body, but Jane's body can't bear it. For a while, Jane's treatment was deadlocked, but this time, Odin did not say anything about expelling Jane, but asked Thor to take Jane and Daisy to live in Asgard with peace of mind. Thor did not object. For Thor, Odin was completely different from his mother Frigga. Compared with Odin, his mother was undoubtedly much easier to talk to. Moreover, as the Queen of Gods, Thor believed that his mother's knowledge was no less than that of his father. Whether it was for the maintenance of his love, or for the exploration of ways to save Jane, Thor felt it was necessary to let his mother see the girl he had chosen. Therefore, after Odin said that he would not expel Jane, Thor wanted to take Jane and Daisy to see his mother without any hesitation. Sherlock naturally had to follow behind Thor, but because of the other particles, Sherlock could not get too close to Thor and Jane, so he could only wait for Thor to take the lead and walk a little distance before Sherlock could follow. But this time, Sherlock was about to leave, but was pulled by Odin on the other side. To be honest, the moment Odin pulled him, Sherlock's hair stood up. After all, Odin was a real father-level combat force. Even if he was old and regressed now, it was not something Sherlock could compare to now. What? Sherlock's unforgivable curse had already touched the rules, and he couldn't defeat Odin? Don't be ridiculous. Even if the big melon is strengthened to an epic level, it still needs to be able to really beat people. Don't look at Odin's age now. But when it comes to a fight, you can see if he can beat you with his body. Although the Asgardians look exactly like the Earthlings, and if you don't tell them, you can't tell whether they are Asgardians or Earthlings, but they are a real race in appearance. The physical strength is not comparable to the weak chickens like the Earthlings. Although Odin is old, as long as Odin wants, tearing a living person apart with his hands is nothing for Odin. Chapter 333 Odin's Entrustment. To be honest, Sherlock was a little scared when facing Odin alone. Strength was one aspect. After all, Sherlock was no match for Odin, and it was on his territory. But the most important thing was the feeling of fear when facing an elder. How to describe it? It was like when you were drinking with your brother, smoking and holding a cup, talking about dirty things, praising technicians on the left and beauties on the right. It was so unpleasant. When you turned around, you found that your parents and your brother's parents were sitting at the table next to you. Didn't you feel scared all of a sudden, and turned around from a weathered social person to an obedient and well-behaved good baby? That's right, Sherlock felt the same way when facing Thor's biological father Odin. Although it was not the feeling of meeting his father-in-law, it was not much different from meeting his father-in-law. In short, it was the feeling of embarrassment and fear. But Odin had spoken, so Sherlock couldn't not listen, right? Moreover, Thor, a fool who only has the opposite sex but no friends, did not notice him at all. He threw himself on Jean wholeheartedly and did not notice that Sherlock behind him did not follow him at all. Sherlock really wanted to curse his mother. He was definitely not compatible with Thor! Exclamation mark. Although he was cursing in his heart, Sherlock still smiled and followed Odin obediently. Odin took Sherlock to turn left and right in the palace, and finally came to a room with a small porch. There were 2 guards at the door of the room. Sherlock knew that the main use of such a room with a small porch in the European court was to prevent eavesdropping. After all, a big door could not prevent someone from eavesdropping, but with this small porch, no matter what the people in the room said, no one outside could hear it. Seeing Odin taking him to such a room, Sherlock felt a little bad. What the hell was he trying to do? After all, most of these rooms are used to discuss confidential matters. Sherlock believes that as an Earthling, even if he has a good relationship with the Prince of Asgard, he cannot reach the level of being able to inquire about secrets. However, in the face of Odin's invitation, Sherlock finally gritted his teeth and entered the room. No matter what, Odin is an elder. Even if you don't look at Odin's strength, just considering his age, Sherlock has to respect Odin. For a full half hour, no one outside knew what happened in this small room. After half an hour, Sherlock walked out of this secret room with a weird look on his face. How to say it? During this half hour, Odin checked Sherlock's body, including Sherlock's magic, and then told some of his own speculations and secrets. What shocked Sherlock the most was the secret about the Infinity Stones that Odin said. In fact, the Infinity Stones are conscious, and they will take the initiative to approach people who have similar or superior abilities to them. This is the instinct of those Infinity Stones. Of course, this situation is not a good thing for those who have gems. After all, no one can guarantee that your enemy will have the power of the infinite gems that is more compatible with you than you. Therefore, in order to maximize the power of the infinite gems, countless races in the universe have fully utilized their wisdom, just like the Eye of Agamotto of the Ancient One and the Cosmic Cube of Asgard. Even the Infinity Gauntlet is like this, and the Infinity Gauntlet is a more powerful equipment that can forcibly mobilize the power of all the infinite gems. Of course, the stronger the ability, the greater the cost. Or in this case, there is nothing in the entire universe that can withstand such an energy impact when forcibly mobilizing the power of all the infinite gems. According to Odin, Sherlock also roughly guessed why the reality gems like him so much. Tony had examined Sherlock after exposing the magic in front of Tony. Sherlock's magic is actually different from Kamatage's magic. Most of Kamatage's magic uses energy as an exchange to complete various magical effects. And Sherlock's magic is pure and unreasonable to directly modify the rules. Take the levitation spell for example. When the spell is applied to an object, it directly eliminates the gravity on the object, and it also goes beyond the rules to directly tell the object to float in the air, and then the object that is cast the spell really floats up. You can tell me whether this thing is reasonable or not. Of course, apart from this matter, Odin actually spends most of the time nagging Sherlock about other things. It's those other things for some reason that sound weird to Sherlock. It's like entrusting an orphan to someone. And entrusting an orphan to someone else is fine if it's like Liu Bei entrusting an orphan to Zhuge Liang. The key point is that the person Odin entrusted his orphan to is Thor, who is actually stronger than Sherlock in terms of martial arts. Stronger in body, and several times older than Sherlock. How to say it? There are so many points to complain about that Sherlock didn't know where to start complaining for a while. But Odin was nagging like an old father who was about to die. What else could Sherlock say? He could only agree with a smile. After Sherlock left Odin, he went to Frigga to find Thor with a strange expression on his face. While walking, he was still thinking whether he should reveal something to change the plot or something. After all, Sherlock had a really good impression of Thor's mother. As he walked, Sherlock discovered a very serious thing. Damn it, he was actually lost. To be honest, this was the first time Sherlock experienced the feeling of being lost in someone else's house. How should I put it? Suddenly, it felt like a domineering president's literature shining into reality. But looking from another direction, Thor, except for being a little silly, really meets all the conditions of domineering president literature. Fortunately, when Sherlock was in Asgard last time, the arms business was in full swing, and most of the guards and soldiers in the palace knew Sherlock, the black-hearted arms dealer. They didn't catch the sneaky Sherlock as an intruder, and they were very enthusiastic to show Sherlock the way. Of course, since they were already talking, Sherlock couldn't help but sell another wave of arms, but this time it wasn't just small guns and bullets. This time Sherlock added all the heavy firepower for individual soldiers. Fortunately, Sherlock replenished the stock after his last trip, otherwise the business this time would not be so easy to do. Of course, Sherlock didn't expect that. Because of his arms trade, the Dark Elves who easily invaded Asgard in the plot would be beaten to tears in reality. Chapter 334, Gentle Goddess Frigga. Of course, beating up the Dark Elves later was a story for later. Sherlock was doing business while walking. It only took half an hour to get to Odin's room. It took Sherlock 3 hours to get to Frigga's room. When Sherlock really arrived at the door of Frigga's room, most of the weapons in the library had been used up. After tidying up his messy clothes and taking a bottle of water from the library to moisten his throat, Sherlock was about to raise his hand to knock on the door when the door of Frigga's room was pushed open. Thor's big bearded face suddenly appeared in front of Sherlock. Sherlock was shocked by the sudden appearance of Thor. It was not known whether it was intentional or a subconscious stress reaction. Sherlock punched the big face that suddenly appeared. With a cry of pain from Thor, Thor fell headfirst at the door of his mother's house and got a panda eye. Sherlock was also embarrassed. After all, he gave someone else's son an electric cannon in front of his mother. This matter was unacceptable. But it seems that Frigga didn't mean to blame Sherlock. Instead, she looked at Thor, who was lying on the ground with a confused look, with disdain, and then hurriedly went up to hold Sherlock, who was standing awkwardly at the door. I've heard about you from Thor for a long time. I didn't have a chance to talk to you last time you came. Thank you for taking care of my stupid son when you were on Earth, Frigga said, while kicking Thor, who was lying on the ground, with disdain. Sherlock felt indescribably strange at this time. Thor's old father had just entrusted his son to her, and Thor's mother treated him so politely. The most important thing was that he had also given Thor an electric shock in person. How to say it? It was magical that there was a little bit of unspeakable embarrassment mixed in with the spring breeze. Seeing that Frigga seemed to be looking at him expectantly, Sherlock remembered that he seemed to have to say something, and hurriedly apologized to Frigga. I'm sorry, dear Queen of Gods, just now it was really a subconscious reaction, I really didn't mean to beat your son in front of you. After all, Sherlock was the first to start. Sherlock almost burned his CPU and couldn't think of how to respond to Frigga. In the end, he could only reply with a sentence that didn't make sense. Sherlock now felt that he was about to cry because of his stupidity. If it was a peer, a younger generation, or a colleague or friend, Sherlock would have a lot of ways to deal with it, from going crazy to apologizing. Sherlock would definitely not be stuck at all. But Sherlock, who has been an only child for 2 lifetimes, is really not good at dealing with elders, especially Frigga, who is an elder who is a friend. What? You mean Tony? Come on. Although Tony is Sherlock's elder, do you think he looks like an elder at all? Which good elder would bring a younger generation to a party organized by himself? Is that something that a carbon-based creature can think of? As if she had noticed Sherlock's embarrassment and nervousness, Frigga gently rubbed Sherlock's head and said in a gentle tone, "It's okay, Thor. This naughty monkey should be disciplined. Also, don't be so reserved, just call me auntie. I'm old enough to be your grandmother on Earth, so there's no need to be so nervous in front of me," Frigga said while making a naughty look, and when she talked about Thor, she made a blatant expression of disdain, which made Sherlock dumbfounded. He looked at Frigga, who was holding his arm with a kind face, and then at Thor, who had just stood up with his eyes covered, and Jane and Daisy, who were hiding in the corner of the room, and laughing with their mouths covered. Sherlock felt that his CPU was about to burn out, especially when he looked at Frigga and Thor. He thought of the time when Thor was demoted to Earth by Thor, and when he opened his mouth, he said something like the Prince of Asgard, and when he closed his mouth, he said something like the bravest warrior. Looking at Frigga, who has high IQ and EQ, Sherlock even began to doubt whether Thor, this idiot, was really Frigga's biological child. If he was really a biological child, then Thor was really screwed. He didn't inherit any of his mother's advantages. Look at the Queen of Gods with Hayek. Until now, she has never called the Earth Midgard, but has always called it Earth. If it were Thor, this idiot, he probably wouldn't notice these things at all. And looking at the situation in the room, it was obvious that both Jane and Daisy liked Frigga, the Queen of Gods, very much. Compared with her mother, Thor was really hopeless. It can only be said that Odin really saw Thor without any difference. After a few simple greetings with Frigga, Frigga seemed to see that Sherlock's eyes were always looking at her silly son who was covering his eyes, and naturally understood what it meant. She took the initiative to end the topic and ran to the side to pull Jane and Daisy to start whispering. Seeing that Frigga had let him go, Sherlock almost immediately began to send a telegram to Thor with his eyes. Oh my god, Thor, you idiot. Are you really Aunt Frigga's biological child? The difference is too big. Although Thor now has a panda eye, and one eye is left with one hand covering it, his ability to receive Sherlock's telegrams has not been reduced at all. After receiving Sherlock's ruthless complaints, Thor's eyes glared, and he immediately responded with a telegram. Fuck it, I must be my mother's biological child. Loki is adopted. What do you mean by that? After receiving Thor's eye telegram, Sherlock decisively rolled his eyes, and the meaning was very clear. You didn't inherit any of my good qualities. Seeing Sherlock's speechless look, Thor clenched his fists in anger. To be honest, if his mother hadn't been watching here, Thor would have dragged Sherlock to practice with him, just because of Sherlock's words, so that Sherlock could feel the weight of the meow meow hammer with his face. Of course, playing around is playing, but Thor didn't forget the business. Seeing that Sherlock didn't want to pay attention to him, Thor didn't care whether his mother was there or not, and went up and grabbed Sherlock and walked out. Sherlock thought that Thor wanted to retaliate, so he naturally resisted desperately, but in terms of physical strength alone, even if 10 Sherlocks were tied together, they couldn't beat Thor, a fool with muscles in his brain. In the end, Sherlock was dragged out of Frigga's room by Thor. As soon as the door of the room was closed, the expression on Thor's face suddenly became serious, and he said to Sherlock, "Sherlock, I know what's inside Jane's body, and I know how to save Jane. I have a plan, but I need your help." Chapter 335 Sherlock, is that a tumor on your shoulder? To be honest, when Sherlock heard Thor say that he had a plan, he was very happy. How should I put it? It was like a surprise that his own pigs not only knew how to dig cabbages, but also had brains. Sherlock put on an expression of "please start your performance," and looked at Thor expectantly. Thor did not hesitate, and immediately explained his so-called plan to Sherlock. Originally, Sherlock still looked at Thor expectantly, wanting to hear how the child's brain was growing. But after Thor told his plan, Sherlock's expression began to gradually become strange. Thor's plan was very simple. First, Thor learned the whole story of the Dark Elves from his mother Frigga, and also knew what the other particles that the Dark Elves referred to were. Based on this, Thor planned several steps to save Jane. The first step was to collect the Dark Elves entrenched in the 9 realms. Thor had already learned about this from his mother. Step 2. Thor took Sherlock and Jane and went to the lair of the Dark Elves through the Rainbow Bridge, while his father was not paying attention. Step 3. Hammer directly. Step 4. After hammering the Dark Elves, ask the Dark Elves to take out the other particles in Jane's body without hurting Jane. Step 5. After everything was done, Thor and Sherlock took the other particles and restored Jane back to Asgard. After Thor finished talking to Sherlock, Sherlock had an expression like an old man on the subway. "Good man, what are you talking about? Hammer directly? And hammer them, to be honest? I can only say that you planned it very well. I hope you don't plan it next time. You must have forgotten that you are a carbon-based creature. You are not a machine. You have a physical limit. If the Dark Elves are really numerous, you can be exhausted to death by just consuming them, and a lot of ants can bite elephants to death. Let alone you. Even the Maxim, which is known as the Cavalry Harvester and Part-Time Boiler, has a layer of water cooling buff. If it faces a human wave tactics, even if it does not consider the ammunition, it will eventually be scrapped after wading through the line. Even if you are Thor, a powerful the child of the god King Odin, and have the blessing of artifacts such as the Meow Hammer, Sherlock absolutely does not believe that Thor can match the Maxim with unlimited ammunition. The most important thing is that, if you say this plan is not perfect, Thor is still looking at Sherlock complacently, as if he is very satisfied with his plan. Sherlock looked at the complacent Thor and sighed helplessly. He originally thought that the child had finally grown a brain and the muscles in his head had finally retreated a little, but now it seems that Sherlock still thought too much. The most important thing is that Sherlock showed an expression that he could not describe, and Thor seemed to not see it, and chased Sherlock and repeatedly asked if it was a good plan. Sherlock is now more and more certain of one thing: his damn Thor is definitely not the biological child of Odin and Frigga. That guy, Frigga's emotional intelligence and Odin's IQ, this guy didn't inherit any of it. Compared with Thor, Sherlock even thinks that Loki is more like the biological child of Odin and Frigga. Although this guy is a little arrogant, at least he has IQ. Looking at Sherlock with an indescribable expression, Thor grabbed Sherlock's shoulder and shook it. "How is it, Sherlock? My plan is perfect, right? I'll go find Jane now. Let's set off immediately." After Thor finished speaking, he immediately wanted to pull Sherlock to find Jane and implement the so-called perfect plan. Fortunately, Sherlock reacted quickly and grabbed Thor, who was about to turn around. When Thor turned around and looked at Sherlock with a confused look on his face, Sherlock's contempt on his face was so undisguised that he stared at Thor with contempt and replied, "Thor, tell me honestly, is that a big tumor on your shoulders? Can you call this a plan? Can you use a little wisdom? Well, even if your plan can be executed, have you thought about the number of people you are fighting against? How many people can you beat? If you are besieged, how long can you last?" Sherlock pointed at Thor's face and output madly. After a while, Thor lowered his head with a guilty look on his face, as if he was a dog that was scolded. In the end, Sherlock couldn't stand it anymore and took the initiative to tell Thor about what might happen in the future. Facing Sherlock's story, Thor obviously didn't believe it at all. "What? The Dark Elves will invade Asgard? What? My mother will die at the hands of the leader of the Dark Elves, the spicy chicken shreds? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. I'm Asgard, the Lord of the Nine Realms, can be invaded by a race that was beaten to pieces by my grandfather? What a shocking joke are you playing? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. And you said you can predict. Don't be ridiculous." Looking at all the magicians in the 9th class, from his own mother to those who just learned magic, Thor has never heard of a magician who said that he could predict the future. Seeing the unbelievable look on Thor's face, Sherlock couldn't stand it anymore. He took out his wand and waved it in front of Thor's eyes repeatedly, until Thor couldn't stand it anymore. He slapped Sherlock's hand that was waving the wand in front of his eyes and asked Sherlock, "Why are you waving a small wooden stick in front of me?" Sherlock finally couldn't stand it anymore. He raised his hand and cast a silencing spell on Thor. Seeing Thor's face full of horror, he kept touching his mouth that opened and closed, but couldn't make any sound. Sherlock nodded with satisfaction. Then he transformed in front of Thor and became the same as when he participated in the Battle of New York. Then Sherlock almost watched helplessly as Thor, the muscular man, performed a series of vivid performances of being dumbfounded, shocked, and dumbfounded. Note that these idioms do not describe a state, but a process. That's right. In the end, Thor's CPU was almost burned out, and he still didn't understand why his good brother suddenly became his good comrade in arms. Thor said that he didn't understand, but he was shocked. But even so, Thor didn't believe a word of Sherlock's so-called prophecy. Looking at Thor, who was stubborn, Sherlock experienced the difficulty of raising a child for the first time in his lives, and also understood Odin's difficulty. Now Sherlock has only one thought in his mind: it's really hard to raise a naughty child. Chapter 336, Sherlock's Prophecy. Seeing that Thor would not believe it, Sherlock was finally forced to pull Thor into Frigga's room. Frigga watched with eager eyes as Thor took out a handsome young man and was taken back by a guy with black hair all over his body. Frigga was a little overwhelmed. In particular, the clothes on the guy with black hair all over his body gave Frigga an unusually familiar feeling, as if she had seen it somewhere before, but she couldn't tell where she had seen it. Seeing Frigga's eyes gradually become strange, Sherlock remembered what the raw materials of the clothes with full protection on his body were, and immediately put the clothes away. What's the difference between this and showing off his lost mobile phone in front of the owner? After smiling awkwardly at Frigga, Sherlock quickly told Frigga about his prophecy. In order to prove his prophecy, Sherlock even took out a lot of magic books belonging to his own magic system to testify. You really don't say it. Frigga, as the Queen of Gods, is a powerful witch. She is naturally very interested in Sherlock's unique magic system. And the magic book that Sherlock took out is also well founded, and Frigga will naturally not let it go. But unfortunately, although Frigga can confirm that what Sherlock said is true, she can't learn Sherlock's magic system, and at most she can only learn from it. After all, Sherlock's magic itself requires talent. If you can use it, you can use it anyway, and the worst is a silent ending. But if you are a muggle and can't use it, then you will never have any chance to use Sherlock's magic in this life. Most of the magic in Marvel is a kind of magic that ordinary people can learn. Even magic power is a kind of lone relationship, and even the Queen of Gods Frigga is no exception. This also means that Frigga can't learn Sherlock's magic at all. In other words, if you are not born to be able to use magic, then don't want to set foot in Sherlock's magic field that is powerful to the elementary rules in this life. For these muggles, Kamatage's spells are their goal. Although she couldn't learn it, Frigga still affirmed the magic of Sherlock's magic, and believed in Sherlock's prophecy even more. In this regard, Sherlock could only say that saying that he could predict this matter was simply a panacea-like reason. Thanks to Aunt Rowling for adding the panacea-like prophetic power that can steal talent to the HP power system when writing the story. After confirming the power of Sherlock's prophecy, Frigga became more serious about Sherlock's prophecies about the future. Compared with the iron-headed Thor, there is no doubt that Frigga is definitely a good decision maker. In some ways, Frigga is even wiser than Odin. After Sherlock and Frigga discussed, a bold plan was soon formed under the discussion of the two. Of course, Frigga is not a fool, and she still has a trick up her sleeve. After all, according to Sherlock's prophecy, the Dark Elves will send a so-called prisoner to Asgard soon. And this prisoner is the beginning of all the troubles. According to the discussion between Frigga and Sherlock, if the Dark Elves really send a prisoner soon, it will mean the beginning of the plan. Compared with Thor's plan, which is almost equal to recklessness and brainlessness, the plan discussed by Frigga and Sherlock can undoubtedly be called a plan. The plan of the two is actually very simple, and the main point is to let nature take its course. Doesn't that spicy chicken want to invade Asgard to snatch the ether particles in Jane's body? Then let him come. At that time, Sherlock will hide in Frigga's room to ensure Frigga's safety. Let the spicy chicken extract the ether particles in Jane's body, and then Thor will break in, knock the spicy chicken away and save Jane. The plan can also be said to be very simple, but compared with Thor's plan, this time Sherlock has the help of countless Asgard soldiers and guards. In terms of success, it is definitely many times more than Thor's so-called hammer plan. As for the safety of Asgard's guards and soldiers, don't be ridiculous. Think about it. Thor is a prince and a fighter. When he encounters a problem, he thinks of beating them up. How can the soldiers and guards in the underground be good? Asgard's martial arts are not just bragging. If the day comes, the guards and soldiers will probably laugh more happily than anyone else. After all, if they don't fight, they will probably be guards or soldiers in their whole lives, and at most they will be centurions. Once the fight starts, are those who rush over from the opposite side called enemies? No. They are human-shaped self-propelled military medals. Don't say that opening the family tree alone to burn the first incense, worshipping the ancestors, and walking in front of the father is very attractive to rabbits. In fact, for the soldiers and guards of Asgard, the temptation is even greater. Even the Queen of Gods Frigga didn't think there was anything wrong with this matter. You know, this is the Queen of Gods who is known for her gentleness. She is the person who should be the mother of the world and the whole Asgard. However, the plan of several people was not told to Odin in the end. After all, as the king of Asgard, Odin undoubtedly had more things to consider, and Odin was also in his twilight years. Compared with Odin before, Odin in his twilight years was undoubtedly more merciful and more indecisive. After the two of them discussed it, everyone was satisfied, leaving only Thor, who was still unable to speak, pointing at his mouth with an anxious look. Seeing that Thor was about to be injured by holding it in, Sherlock finally couldn't bear to let this big fool who looked like a golden retriever, but was actually a husky, continue to hold it in. In the end, he waved his wand to remove the magic on Thor, but what Sherlock never expected was that the first sentence Thor said, after he could speak, was to hug Sherlock's shoulders and ask seriously, "Sherlock, you are the wizard who stood beside me during the Battle of New York. Oh my god. You actually hid it from me. Damn it, do you really regard me as a good friend?" It would have been better if Thor hadn't said this. After he finished speaking, everyone present looked at Thor with a speechless expression, except for Frigga, who helplessly put her hand on her forehead. "So you just realized that something was wrong with Sherlock now? Good man, you got beaten up for nothing on Earth." Chapter 337, or 3-Person Trip, Part 1. Frigga was speechless about her silly son. After she kicked Thor, she rolled her eyes helplessly and left the room. As the Queen of Asgard, Frigga knew that eggs should never be put in one basket. Although she believed Sherlock's so-called prophecy, it did not mean that Frigga would not make other preparations. After all, the more prepared you are, the calmer you will be when facing emergencies. This is the eternal truth, isn't it? After Frigga left, the atmosphere in the whole room became relaxed. After all, although Jane's current situation is dangerous, it is not that dangerous. It is not the kind of thing that will die tomorrow. In addition, Sherlock and his mother have discussed the follow-up plan, and Thor's worries are temporarily put down. Thor, who was relieved, pulled Jane out without hesitation. Thor had too many things to share with Jane. The two left Frigga's room with pink bubbles all the way, leaving only Daisy and Sherlock standing there with their eyes wide open. Just when Daisy was cursing Jane in her heart for being the same kind of jerk who was inhumane to the opposite sex, and her toes were about to dig out a complete palace of Asgard on the ground, Sherlock sighed helplessly and said to Daisy, "Come with me, I'll find someone to arrange accommodation for you." After all, it was not the first time Sherlock came here, and he was very familiar with arranging accommodation. After arranging accommodation for Daisy, Sherlock also arranged a room for himself. After resting for a night, Sherlock was surprised to find that everyone was inexplicably idle. After all, no one knew when the damn dark elf would send their so-called general over. But it was good to be idle. Anyway, both Thor and Sherlock were satisfied. Thor had too many places he wanted to take Jane to visit, and too many friends he wanted to introduce to Jane. So for 3 days in a row, Thor could almost always be seen taking Jane to show off their love in Asgard. Later on, Thor was no longer satisfied with just showing off his love, but began to actively force love into other people's mouths. The most typical example is that he would take Jane to friends' gatherings to meet, show off, and show off, show off, to meet, show off, and show off, show off. Thor's group of single friends saw Thor and Jane as if they saw the plague god, and turned around and left without even hesitation. Although Jane was a little embarrassed, she thought that these were Thor's good friends since childhood, and this was also the place where Thor grew up, so she was not so repulsive. After all, you have to pamper your own dog, right? However, Thor did not have an overly self-conscious attitude, and even took Jane to the prison cell in Asgard, and showed off his wife in front of his younger brother Loki. It can only be said that Loki was really miserable. Others could turn around and leave, but Loki was just a tiny place in the prison cell, and he couldn't hide, even if he wanted to. In the end, Thor succeeded in breaking Loki's defense, and he cursed at Thor and Jane. Seeing his brother's defense broken, Thor laughed heartlessly. But this scene seemed a bit strange to Jane. The younger brother was breaking his defense and cursing, but the older brother laughed heartily through the glass. After a long time, he finally said that you brothers have a good relationship. Of course, apart from Jane and Thor, who are anti-dog lovers who like to abuse dogs at every turn. Daisy's life these days is not bad. After all, strictly speaking, this is also Daisy's first trip out of the planet, and it is a serious interstellar trip. Everything in Asgard is enough to make Daisy crazy. From architecture to humanities, from history to geography, everything in Asgard is different from all places on Earth. Especially history. You must know that in Asgard, it is extremely difficult for you as an outsider to gain knowledge. Just look at Sherlock's experience in the palace library last time. But the only thing that makes Daisy crazy is the jewelry and environment of Asgard. The extremely precious gems on Earth are actually as cheap as stones in Asgard. After all, Asgard is a serious cosmic civilization. For the extremely precious jewels on Earth, they are indeed the same as stones for cosmic civilizations. After all, the resources in the universe are unlimited. It is hard to guarantee that there is a planet that is made up of gems. It is raining diamonds from the sky, and buried in the soil is imperial green. Therefore, the price of gems in Asgard is not expensive, and it can even be said that it is almost the same as giving them away for free. The only thing that is more expensive than gems is pearls, which require biological and time to produce. Similarly, the price of gold is not expensive. Compared with the price on Earth, the gold here is as cheap as silver on Earth. Although gold is the universal currency of the universe, for a true cosmic civilization, even precious gold can be obtained through the mining of countless planets, which is nothing more than a little effort. Therefore, the price of gold is not very high. These 2 points are almost making Daisy's mouth harder to suppress than knack. However, the real reason that made Daisy become pouty and even wanted to stay in Asgard and didn't want to leave was Asgard's cosmetics. After all, Asgard is a martial arts country. Even women are extremely martial. Therefore, they don't have many cosmetics like lipstick and eyeshadow here. Even in terms of types, classifications, and color numbers, any cosmetics company on Earth can beat Asgard. Women in Asgard really don't wear makeup. After all, when they are fighting, the makeup will sweat and get into their eyes, which may affect their fighting. However, they are far ahead in the field of skincare products. They may not wear makeup, but they take care of their skin. Just by looking at the ingredient list, you can tell that these skincare products are several versions ahead of the skincare products on Earth. Those alien things that can make people confused just by looking at the name. The skincare products in Asgard are really advanced. The classification is even more detailed than the skincare products on Earth. God knows how upset Sherlock was when Daisy ran to Sherlock excitedly one evening and started to introduce him to a skincare product that can only remove brackets on his face. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 338, or 3-Person Trip, Part 2. Of course, the other 3 were having so much fun, so Sherlock naturally wouldn't cry and think about those trivial things. However, compared with the pure playstyle of the other 3, Sherlock's playstyle was more of a career-oriented one. What did Sherlock do? He set up a small stall between the palace and the training ground without blushing or beating his heart. That's right, Sherlock ran to Asgard to set up a stall, and what he practiced were all things that were absolutely illegal on Earth. Apart from some small gadgets from Earth that the soldiers, guards, and warriors bought to make the beautiful women smile, most of what Sherlock sold were weapons and their accessories. After all, the last time Sherlock came here, he bought a lot of weapons, and they were all her mother's plain guns. This time, Sherlock finally brought the accessories. It's said that, although Sherlock is an eagle source in this life, the money-making spirit that belongs only to rabbits and his bones is still strong. Sherlock is selling things very well. What? The ammunition life is not enough. Look, this thing is called an extended magazine, which can satisfy your dream of firing a gun at a time. What? Not enough. Come on. Come on. Here is the 100-round drum magazine you have always dreamed of. I guarantee that after 2 drum magazines, your gun barrel will turn red. What? Can't hit accurately? No problem. Look here. The newly launched laser sight, combined with the Picatinny rail, is easy to install and simple to use. You can shoot wherever you point, so that you don't have to worry about aiming in the future. What? Dislike the lack of close combat ability? Come on, a full set of bayonets used with firearms, which supports customization and modification, and can guarantee both shooting and chopping, and long range and close combat. What? You still dislike it for not being personalized enough? Comrade, you have a lot of requirements, but it doesn't matter. Gunsmith Zyarksha is online. Whether you want to carve or change the color, we provide one-stop service throughout the process, and even have kits to improve the performance of firearms. As long as the price is right, there is nothing that cannot be negotiated. Of course, it's not that no one dislikes the low power of firearms. Sherlock naturally has a way to deal with it. Fortunately, Sherlock's inventory is sufficient this time. Sherlock has all kinds of calibers. Aren't you Asgardian strong? Come on, you can just use the mortar as a pistol. We support on-site modification. We guarantee that one modification will be silent. If you dislike that the shot is not straight enough, no problem. Sherlock can even dismantle the anti-aircraft gun and modify it and put it in the customer's hand. Anyway, there is no such thing as a military court for laying down anti-aircraft guns. Come on. This time, Sherlock even brought a Gatling gun. The large caliber Gatling gun, equipped with armor-piercing depleted uranium bombs, let alone people. Even her mother's silicon-based life Optimus Prime would have to kneel down and call him daddy. Of course, the price, I can only say that those who understand will understand. Although Asgard's warriors have always liked close combat, they only like it when it comes to close combat. Even if they like close combat, they have to make killing the opponent their top priority. Therefore, Sherlock's stall is always crowded from morning to night. Of course, the two Gatling guns used for holding the line were really bought by someone, and not only did Sherlock buy them, but he also gave them a personalized service. According to the customer's requirements, two huge blades were pressed on the upper and lower parts of the Gatling gun to make it a serious giant sword. As for the person who bought the Gatling gun, well, he is our old friend, the cowardly soldier who stood out with two M16s when Asgard was about to be destroyed in the original plot. You really don't say it. Maybe it was because he was the first to buy weapons from Sherlock last time. Relying on the guns purchased from Sherlock, this guy's really a lot more confident. The guy who was proud of Sherlock would naturally not miss the opportunity to get closer. This time, the Gatling gun that Sherlock took out was taken into the pocket by this guy, who spent all his money. Of course, Sherlock was not without sympathy for old customers. Finally, after a conversation, Sherlock not only gave a personalized customization service, but also a lightweight modification service. To put it bluntly, some magic patterns were put on the gun. On the one hand, it was to reduce the overall weight. After all, this thing is a cannon. Coupled with the two huge blades, the overall weight is considered a heavy sword for the strong Asgardians. Even in line with the principle of doing good things to the end and sending Buddha to the west, Sherlock also gave the ammunition box a wave of traceless expansion spells to expand the capacity and floating spells to reduce the weight. You really don't say it. This guy originally had the image of a big bald head, and with the Gatling gun with a large blade, he felt a bit like a Gatling bodhisattva who saves the suffering. Sherlock even imagined the guy holding two Gatling guns with a grim smile on his face, while shouting Namo Gatling Bodhisattva, 6 pure depleted uranium bombs, 1 breath 36,000 turns, great compassion and great mercy to save the world. I don't know why I always feel a little bit out of place. After thinking about it, Sherlock, out of his own bad taste, casually gave this guy a cassock and told him that this cloak has a blessing effect. Seeing this guy happily put on the same red cassock as Tang Monk as a cloak on the spot, Sherlock imagined it again. Well, this time it tastes right. I don't know if this can be regarded as a little shock from the earth to Hela. Of course, Sherlock did a good job in business this time, and naturally gained a lot. This time Sherlock didn't just focus on weapons and armor. These things are no longer of much use to Sherlock. After all, there are still a lot of these things left in Sherlock's library. This time, Sherlock focused on collecting money. Of course, it is not the local currency of Asgard. Sherlock mainly focuses on antiques, precious metals, special weapons and pigeon egg-sized gems. It is said that no one who does business is a good person. A laser pointer, even if it is a serious military version, is only worth 1,000 to 2,000 US dollars on Earth. Sherlock has turned over a lot of money in Asgard. Based on the idea that gold and jewelry in Asgard are worthless, the price Sherlock sells is even more unscrupulous than that of unscrupulous merchants on Earth. He asks for gold by tons, and doesn't even look at gems smaller than pigeon eggs. Antiques are okay, but he only accepts antiques from Earth. After all, Asgard's warriors have been to Earth, so this is not difficult. The only difficulty was the special weapons. After all, Sherlock wanted weapons or equipment like the Meow Hammer, and most of those artifacts were actually not available in the hands of these warriors and guards. Even if they did, no one would sell their main weapons for secondary weapons. Even so, Sherlock could be said to have made a lot of money. After all, Sherlock's asking price would not be called a profiteer on Earth, but rather a robbery. Chapter 339 Dark Elves. It turns out that God still takes good care of Sherlock. Just when Sherlock almost emptied the inventory in his library and made the whole library magnificent and glittering, Spicy Chicken Shreds, who seemed to have read the 36 stratagems of the rabbit, but did not understand it very well, sent the so-called general who was used to cut off the firewood to Asgard through the Rainbow Bridge. Out of curiosity, Sherlock also ran over to take a look. It didn't matter if he took a look. After reading it, Sherlock really wanted to ask, calling this thing an elf, didn't the real elves resist? In addition to the white hair and long ears that are similar to elves, what else can be called an elf? It's not that Sherlock discriminates, but Sherlock really can't figure out why this thing is called an elf. Could it be that these guys rely on the skin color comparable to Sherlock's Temu, who was covered with corpse spots all over his body after being dead for 7 days? Or rely on the face that is comparable to the Himalayas, and the face cleanser is stuck on the face and can't be applied evenly? Or is it the big black teeth that can only be obtained by smoking for 50 years and drinking coffee and tea as water and never washing teeth? Sherlock didn't understand and was shocked. He looked at the Dark Elf's general escorted by 4 Asgard warriors with an expression of "Are you kidding me?" the whole time. The whole surrender ceremony was held in the palace of Asgard, hosted by the god King Odin and the god Queen Frigga. Although Thor was also present, it was obvious that, although Thor was the prince of Asgard, it was obvious that Thor was not used in this ceremony. As Sherlock's good friend, Thor, who was standing on the side as the captain of the security team, almost saw his good brother, Sherlock, standing not far away. Looking at the expression of incomprehension on Sherlock's face that was almost undisguised, Thor almost understood what Sherlock was thinking. He quietly moved to Sherlock's side, and Thor approached Sherlock with a mysterious look on his face, and said to Sherlock in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "Put away your inexperienced look, I know what you are thinking. This thing has another name in the mouths of Asgard, called the Death Elf." It would have been better if Thor didn't explain, but after the explanation, Sherlock's eyes widened even more, and he even quietly pointed at the general standing under the throne, and asked in disbelief, "That's it? Death Elf?" Looking at Sherlock's obvious expression of "Are you kidding me?" Thor sighed helplessly, and once again leaned close to Sherlock's ear to explain to Sherlock, "It's a death elf, not a death elf, which means it's like the corpse of a dead elf." This time, the shock and confusion on Sherlock's face and the expression of "Fuck, are you kidding me?" disappeared all at once. Well, it can only be said that there are only intertwined names, but no wrong nicknames. The appearance of the Dark Elves does look like the corpses of those elves in the legend, who are famous for their handsomeness, after experiencing inhuman torture and being thrown into the water to become giants. It can only be said that the description has never been so appropriate. Sherlock lost interest in this ceremony after watching for a while. After all, the real Dark Elves are not as attractive as the Dark Elves in the movies and TV shows on Earth. The men all look like this, so Sherlock dare not even think about what the women look like. Anyway, Sherlock feels that he seems to have said goodbye to those Dark Elves who are famous for their fringe in some videos in this life. It is completely unbearable to look directly at it. Of course, these are all small things. The most important thing is that Sherlock will start to get busy. The arrival of this general who is used to cut off the firewood from the bottom of the pot means one thing, that is, the day when the Dark Elves invade Asgard is not far away. Sherlock needs to make some preparations for the previous plan with Frigga. Sherlock turned around and left. He first found Daisy, who was shopping like crazy, and then arranged Daisy into a relatively safe room. After all, if a fight really broke out, no one would care about Daisy. Daisy didn't say anything. When she was in Frigga's room, Daisy naturally listened to Sherlock and Frigga's plan. She just felt a little regretful that she couldn't continue shopping in Asgard. After arranging Daisy, Sherlock found Jane again and arranged Jane directly into Frigga's room. In Jane's unbelievable eyes, he also stuffed Jane with a copy of Self-Cultivation of Actors. After all, when the spicy chicken strips really arrived, it would be a test of Jane and Frigga's acting skills. Frigga Sherlock was not worried at all. After all, the identity and age were here. Compared with Jane, Frigga really had more soul than Jane had eaten. She could crush Jane in acting simply by relying on her life experience. Moreover, compared to Jane's role, Frigga's role is undoubtedly much simpler, so Sherlock is still very worried about Jane's acting skills. Even after giving Jane the book Self-Cultivation of Actors, he did not forget to tell Jane to worship a person named Natalie Portman. According to Sherlock, this person is the god of acting, an Oscar-certified actress, and has a close connection with you. Worshipping more may allow Natalie Portman to possess you at a critical moment and contribute an Oscar-level acting skill. Of course, Jane always looked half believing and half doubting about Sherlock's statement. After all, Jane is not living in a vacuum. In Hollywood, Jane doesn't even know that there is an actress named Natalie Portman. But for some reason, Jane always feels that Natalie Portman in Sherlock's mouth has a very familiar feeling, as if she has known this person for a long time, but she has a weird feeling that she can't remember it. Of course, these were all Sherlock's evil taste. He ignored Jane, who seemed to want to ask who Natalie Portman was. Sherlock picked up his wand and used transfiguration to open a door that looked like a cabinet for cleaning tools opposite Frigga's door. After completing the transformation, Sherlock fixed his transfiguration, opened the cabinet door again, and began to cast the traceless expansion spell in the small cabinet. Jane, who was standing behind Sherlock, almost saw with her own eyes that the cabinet, which originally had only space for a broom and a mop, gradually began to expand under the effect of Sherlock's magic, and even became almost the same as the room opposite. This is unscientific. Jane, who saw Sherlock's magic up close for the first time, was almost shattered. As a doctor of physics, Sherlock's magic just now was completely dancing wildly on the vital point of physics. After hearing Jane's shouting, Sherlock rolled his eyes helplessly. How to say it? It's a common problem on the scientific side. Tony shouted this sentence at the beginning and Sherlock's ears were almost calloused. After rolling his eyes helplessly, Sherlock said to Jane perfunctorily without turning his head, "But it's magical." Chapter 340 Pre-War Preparation. Sherlock's subsequent behavior was to trample on Jane's worldview and dance like crazy, even doing a third subject. After completing the expansion of the room, he took out 5 or 6 infinite cameras, as well as a lot of monitors and infinite signal amplifiers and other things, and started to work in the room. This is because Sherlock usually likes to put some random things into his library, and this time he didn't expect to really use them. Under Jane's unbelievable and extremely complicated gaze, Sherlock assembled these cameras skillfully, and after connecting them, Sherlock calmly placed one on the roof not far from the corridor under Jane's gaze. Sherlock used a transfiguration to make the remaining cameras grow legs and feet, and ran out quickly under Jane's expression. This batch of cameras Sherlock bought were not those cheap ones. Many of them were equipped with infrared lenses, serious infrared lenses, and the kind that can see thermal imaging. Sherlock had these cameras go to the highest point of the palace, facing the entrance of the Rainbow Bridge. In this way, even if spicy chicken shreds came in quietly like the Japanese, Sherlock could still see them through infrared. The rest were scattered throughout the palace, except for 2 in the cells where prisoners were held. Sherlock himself was constantly debugging the signal in the room he had expanded. You really have to say that Sherlock's transformation technique was really good, and the positions of the cameras he found were really good. Jane was a little stupid. After all, the camera's long legs looked like a weird mixture of cyberpunk and the Lord of the Rings. It caused a severe impact on Jane's worldview, and this impact did not even ease after the arrival of the Queen of Gods Frigga. Of course, Sherlock didn't care so much. After getting the camera, Sherlock began to cast another kind of magic in front of the two of them. That's right, it was the famous Fidelius spell. Sherlock regarded himself as a secret keeper. It stands to reason that the Fidelius charm cannot be cast when there are people on the scene. But after Sherlock's experiment, fortunately, under the blessing of Marvel's cosmic laws, the Fidelius charm has been epically strengthened, like chewing a big melon. The two almost watched a bubble-like thing slowly emerge from Sherlock's wand, gradually wrapping the small door in Sherlock's figure. With the formation of the entire bubble, Sherlock and the small door seemed to have never appeared. Not only that, whether it was Frigga or Jane behind them, they almost forgot the existence of this small door at this moment. In their minds, they only remembered that Sherlock used some magic here and did some things, but they couldn't remember what Sherlock did. Until Sherlock walked out of the protection range of the Fidelius charm and told that to the location of the small door. Even Frigga behind him almost couldn't control her expression. Because after Sherlock told them the location of the small room, they almost instantly remembered what Sherlock had just done. Not only that, they also watched eagerly as the small door that had just disappeared slowly squeezed out of the originally flat wall. This scene was amazing even for Frigga, the Queen of Gods. After all, as a witch who had lived for a long time, she could see the power of Sherlock's magic at a glance. If Sherlock didn't want to, even if he smashed the wall, he couldn't find the small room where Sherlock hid. It was as if a force of rules directly wiped out everyone's cognition of this small room in the world. Very magical magic. After experiencing Sherlock's magic once, Frigga admired Sherlock's magic from the bottom of her heart, and at the same time, she was a little envious. You know, as the Queen of Asgard, Frigga could learn almost any kind of magic in the world, as long as she wanted, but none of these magics had the power that was almost like the rules of Sherlock. As for Jane, well, although this girl witnessed the whole process from a safe distance, Jane still looked like she had a shattered worldview. You know, when Jane was on Earth, she saw the magic used by Sherlock when he beat Thor. Although Sherlock also used spells at that time, compared with those colorful BIU spells, the magic Sherlock used now can be said to be completely beyond Jane's cognition. Whether it is the Fidelius spell or the long-legged camera, or the traceless expansion spell that makes physics non-existent, they are all challenging Jane's heart that belongs to a doctorate in physics. After arranging everything, several people also began to enter the planned arrangements. Jane was in Frigga's room holding the book that Sherlock gave her and constantly honing her acting skills. Frigga still followed the daily routine and tasted some habits that she had always insisted on. It was nothing more than bringing some food for Sherlock and Jane. As for Sherlock, Sherlock only came out of the small room once from beginning to end. That time was because the single bed that Sherlock brought with him was really uncomfortable to sleep on, so he ran to his original guest room and moved the large double bed to the small room on standby. Apart from that, Sherlock's eyes almost never left the monitor screen. Although in the movie, the general who dared to cut off the firewood almost immediately turned into a cursed warrior or something like that after entering the prison of Asgard's palace. But this is the real world after all, and spicy chicken strips is not Thor, the reckless man who rushed in with a hammer. In the real world, it takes time to assemble the army if you really want to attack Asgard. Not only that, the spacecraft that the army rides on must be modified to a certain extent. The most typical one is to install a layer of visual invisible camouflage on the exterior of the fleet, which is the same as in the movie. Otherwise, it would be really stupid. God knows if the army will be taken away by a main gun of Asgard when it sets out to the gate of Asgard to meet their Dark Lord. Spicy chicken strips dare not bet on the low probability event that there are no bullets in Asgard's main gun. As for Thor, well, this fool has no acting skills and is easy to be exposed. When making a plan, Frigga did not hesitate to throw this guy outside the cell as a backup to clamp the warrior who escaped. But such an arrangement has inadvertently created a victim. That person is Loki. Well, Thor, who has nothing to do, now likes to run to Loki every day to tease his good brother. This is a plan to bully Loki for many people. Once Loki knows, according to the meanness that Thor has committed in the past few days, it is estimated that Loki will be the first to jump out and hold high the banner of anti-Asgard. not for anything else, just to give his good brother a good beating. Chapter 341, War is Coming, Part 1. For 3 whole days, Sherlock hid in his small room and spent his days watching surveillance, eating, and sleeping. It was as if he had returned to his previous life as a worker. Every day, he either ate or faced the computer screen, waiting for the spicy chicken shreds drama to begin. Until the morning of the 4th day, Sherlock slept until the sun was high in the sky. Then he woke up in a daze, holding a cigarette in his mouth, and ran to the bathroom to release the food in his stomach last night. After a while, Sherlock rubbed his stomach and walked out of the bathroom. He had expanded himself. Because of limited conditions, he could not take a shower. When he was about to clean himself up as usual, the computer at the door that was used to display the monitor screen issued a shrill alarm. After hearing the alarm, Sherlock did not care about his personal hygiene. He grabbed the coat thrown on the bed and went straight to the computer. He sat in front of the screen and began to look for the source of the alarm. Soon Sherlock found out what was alarming. The infrared camera that Sherlock placed in the place where the prisoners were held began to alarm. The reason for the alarm was simple. The camera detected an unknown high temperature. After switching to the normal screen, Sherlock also saw what happened in the cell. That's right, the general began to transform into the strange cursed warrior alone in the cell. Seeing the general who was used to cut off the firewood began to transform, Sherlock decisively switched to the infrared camera facing the Rainbow Bridge. Sure enough, in the infrared camera, huge warships that looked like axe heads began to appear near the Rainbow Bridge of Asgard. Seeing this scene, Sherlock didn't care about anything else. He rushed to the door of Frigga's room opposite and started crazy tricks. Frigga and Jane got up much earlier than Sherlock, the lazy guy. The two had already eaten breakfast and were talking in the room. Sherlock began to bang the door frantically. With a puzzled look, Frigga opened the door. After seeing the door open, Sherlock immediately said to Frigga and Jane, "Here they come. Nicki Minaj is here with his army. Jane, it's time to test your acting skills." After saying that, Sherlock ran back to his little room without stopping. After all, according to the script, if everything went well, Sherlock only needed to jump out and shout "Surprise motherfucker!" exclamation mark. After Nicki Minaj extracted the ether particles from Jane's body, then, he could snatch the ether particles that Nicki Minaj had been thinking about in front of her. The whole process could be described as killing people and making them happy. Sherlock left, but Jane's mouth twitched fiercely. It was not for anything else, but that the script arranged by Sherlock was reasonable, but it was just too much bullshit. Frigga was fine. She only needed to act like she could sacrifice some interests for the life of her future daughter-in-law. When Nicki Minaj arrived, she shouted that, as long as she didn't hurt my daughter-in-law's life, I had no intention of interfering with the rest. But when Jane saw the script Sherlock wrote for her for the first time, if she had not kept a safe distance of 10 meters, she would have wanted to slap the script on Sherlock's face. Do you want to see what you wrote? Facing the coercion of spicy chicken shreds, when she stepped forward to be extracted ether particles by spicy chicken shreds, she needed to express her anger at her powerlessness, her regret for the war she brought to Asgard, her despair for the 9 realms being plunged into darkness, her feeling touched by her mother-in-law's protection of her. There were so many complex emotions. Sherlock listed 10 of them, and Jane wanted to curse after reading them, not to mention that she was a newcomer in acting. Damn, with such complex emotions, even a serious Oscar winner would hardly be able to express them. If she really had such advanced acting skills, wouldn't she study physics and go to Hollywood to be an actor? Wouldn't that be great? To be honest, Jane was a little desperate at the time and even wanted to ask Sherlock if he could use magic to create a fan-shaped diagram in his eyes that looked like the crook-mouthed Dragon King, with 3 parts of indifference, 3 parts of anger, 3 parts of coldness, and 1 part of playfulness. Faced with Jane's powerless request, Sherlock of course rejected it directly. Not to mention, whether magic can do it, even if it can be done one day, he still wants it. The fan-shaped diagram in the eyes can be simply debugged and decorated, and it will be the dream of a pure middle school boy, the Manjaki Sharingan, right? Sherlock even thought of the pattern in his previous life. It was just like the symbol of nuclear radiation, with an atomic bomb in the left eye and a hydrogen bomb in the right eye, and both eyes together would be Susanu holding the Great Tsar. By then, what about the Hokage or the dancing Madara? If he is unhappy, everyone will hold hands and turn into grey. Ahem, I've strayed off topic. Let's get back to business. Facing Jane's request of this question is too difficult. I can't do it. Sherlock was not polite at all and threw Jane another pad, which contained a collection of the best acting skills from ancient and modern times. In Jane's desperate eyes, Sherlock uttered the coldest words with a 37-degree mouth. With the Book of Actors self-cultivation, the learning effect will be better. Everything was planned well, but both Sherlock and Queen Frigga forgot one thing. That is, Sherlock has dumped weapons in Asgard twice. Yes, most of the warriors in Asgard like close combat, but this does not mean that Asgard has no weapons. It's just that in their opinion, Asgard's energy guns are toys for women. The gunpowder guns that Charlotte dumped just hit the pain point of these barbarians. There is a recoil. There is feedback. Physical attack. Coupled with the strong smell of gunpowder, this makes Sherlock's weapon the secondary weapon of these barbarians who like close combat. It was the secondary weapons that almost everyone had that changed the course of the war, turning Sherlock and Frigga's originally perfect plan into an unpredictable direction. At the same time, it also dealt a heavy blow to Spicy Chicken Shreds, who thought they were well prepared, and even used strategies to snatch the other particles. It was not until Spicy Chicken Shreds left Asgard that they realized it. Originally, they thought it was a sneak attack with scouts, but they realized at the end that the Asgardians used a gas stove to ignite the fire, and they didn't use a cauldron to cook, but a big iron pot. That couldn't be any blacker. Chapter 342, War is Coming, Part 2. Let's shift our perspective to the unlucky Nicki Minaj. By stuffing the cursed stone into the general's body, Nicki Minaj is very sure that the entire Asgard is not much different from the Asgard 1,000 years ago. This group of brainless barbarians are still stupid people who like close combat in the universe. As long as their army is assembled in place, relying on the cooperation between themselves and the general, let alone snatching back the other particles that should have belonged to the dark experience from Asgard. If you are lucky, you can even feel the feeling of the aging Asgard throne. That's right, in Nicki Minaj's eyes, he didn't take the old Odin seriously at all. Even if he couldn't really conquer the entire Asgard this time, he could still severely damage Asgard. Let Asgard no longer be able to interfere with his behavior of using other particles to plunge the entire universe into darkness. Once he really succeeds, let alone Asgard, the entire universe will be his plaything. Anyway, Spicy Chicken feels very confident about her plan. It took 3 days to assemble the army. When the army was about to approach Asgard, the cursed stone buried in the general's stomach was activated by the unique means of the Dark Elves. While waiting for her general to turn the entire palace upside down, she ordered her men to activate the stealth device and all members quietly approached the palace of Asgard. The plan was very good, but Spicy Chicken had slept for more than 1,000 years and had no idea that there was a gatekeeper in Asgard who was famous for his eyes. Several dark elf ships had just crossed the Rainbow Gate when they were discovered by this conscientious gatekeeper, and he tried his best to destroy the stealth camouflage of a ship. Seeing that the matter was exposed, Spicy Chicken was no longer timid and ordered the entire army to attack. The ship hit the palace of Asgard, letting these Asgardian barbarians feel the combat effectiveness of the Dark Elves. But unfortunately, the scene that Spicy Chicken imagined, where the two armies slashed at each other with melee weapons and used shields for defense, did not appear. What was there was only that the guards in the palace, after experiencing the initial panic, took up their secondary weapons and began to fight back in a well-trained manner. Accompanied by a sound like the sound of firecrackers during the new year, the Dark Elves, who were originally full of confidence and assembled more than a dozen ships, began to fall in large numbers, which made Spicy Chicken furious. In other words, Sherlock's attention was focused on the camera at the end of the corridor leading to Frigga's room. If Sherlock had seen this scene in the palace, he would have laughed so hard that his nose would have bubbled. Isn't this a vivid demonstration of my lord? Times have changed! Exclamation mark. Faced with such an unexpected situation, Spicy Chicken lost interest in the throne that belonged to Odin at this time. Now the most important thing is the ether particle that can revitalize the Dark Elves. In desperation, Spicy Chicken Strips could only order the remaining Dark Elves to withstand the attack of the barbarians of Asgard, and he led 2 guards to rush towards the direction of the ether particles he sensed. What? The general who cut off the firewood from the bottom of the pot? Forget it, he is now in the dungeon hugging Thor and twisting on the ground. According to the general's idea, based on the idea that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, he only needs to transform into a curse warrior and open the doors of all the cells, which is enough to cause a panic in the palace. But what the general never expected was that the cell door was opened and the prisoners rushed out, but the guards on the other side were not vegetarians either and had no intention of arresting or stopping them. Instead, he took a loudspeaker and shouted 3 times that those who obediently returned to the cell would not be killed, and then a black iron pipe at the end of the corridor began to spray flames. Along with the flames, there were some metal bullets. The defense of the general who turned into a curse warrior had already increased to an incredible level, and those metal bullets might not have much effect on him. But it doesn't mean that it has no effect on the prisoners who escaped with him. In less than a minute, there were only corpses on the ground and the general who was standing there and didn't understand what was going on. The remaining prisoners had already returned to the cell when they saw that the situation was not right. They escaped from prison just to stay alive, but if leaving the cell meant death, no prisoner was a fool and they would definitely go back obediently. As for the remaining generals, well, Thor even slept here these days. Those who couldn't be dealt with by guards and guns could be left to this most courageous prince. With the meow meow hammer in hand, Thor naturally wrestled with the general who had transformed into a cursed warrior. With the help of the meow meow hammer and the guards behind him occasionally firing cold shots to harass the general after his transformation, Thor and the general naturally fought back and forth. It is estimated that the general would forget about meeting with Nicki Minaj as in the movie plot. Back to Nicki Minaj. After leaving the main battlefield, Nicki Minaj was surprised to find that she did not encounter any guards when she went to the direction of the ether particles. This was of course arranged by Frigga. After confirming Nicki Minaj's script, Frigga was not idle. She had been arranging the infantry defense in the entire palace for 3 days. And because of Frigga's identity, no one questioned Frigga's arrangement. As for Frigga's safety, don't joke. As the Queen of Gods, she is also an extremely long-lived witch. How could Frigga's combat effectiveness be bad? It is no exaggeration to say that as long as Frigga wants, without Sherlock's guns, it is a problem for the barbarian guards and soldiers of Asgard to find Frigga. You can see from Loki's illusion that even Thor, who ranks in the top 10 in Asgard in terms of force, is not beaten around by his brother. Along the way, Spicy Chicken Threads felt like he was stepping on a Hot Wheels and wished he could grow 2 more legs. After all, Spicy Chicken Threads didn't know how long his people could hold on. If he didn't get the ether particles and the Dark Elves who were used as cannon fodder died, then his plan, that had been planned for more than 1,000 years, would be a failure. Sherlock had been staring at the computer screen, hoping that the picture on the screen would move. When Sherlock was almost impatient, the figure that Sherlock had been thinking about finally appeared on the computer screen. Spicy Chicken Threads. Here I come. Sherlock muttered to himself and quietly opened the door of his small room. The old man sat at the door. Even if Sherlock was so arrogant within the range of the Fidelius spell, Spicy Chicken Threads and his people could not find Sherlock. Now Sherlock was looking forward to the big show on the other side. To be honest, if Frigga and Jane could not see the situation on his side, Sherlock would even want to hold a bucket of popcorn and quietly watch the wonderful acting from Jane and Frigga. Chapter 343, Comparison of Acting Skills Between Oscars and Online Movies, Part 1. Just as Sherlock thought, Nicki Minaj and his 2 guards did not see Sherlock sitting at the door of his small room and stood at the door of Frigga's room. Nicki Minaj carefully sensed it and confirmed that the ether particles she had been thinking about were behind this door, so she went up and kicked the door of the room open. But the scene behind the door made Nicki Minaj's footsteps stop suddenly. Standing at the door of the room without crossing the line, Sherlock secretly tilted his body and saw the situation in the room through the gap between Nicki Minaj and the other two. At this time, Frigga had changed out of the elegant dress that represented the status of the Queen of God that she had originally worn. Instead, she wore a set of tight clothes designed for women and sat on a chair opposite the door. In front of Frigga was a small table for drinking tea, and on the table was a cold and shining Asgard-style sword. Frigga was sitting behind the table with a cup of steaming tea, smiling at Spicy Chicken, who kicked the door open, as if she was not surprised by the arrival of Spicy Chicken. Compared with Frigga, Jane was not so calm. At this time, Jane was sitting on a balcony not far behind Frigga, just like a primary school student facing the teacher's questions. Her whole body was tense, and she looked at Spicy Chicken standing at the door with a trace of horror in her eyes. Faced with such a strange situation, Spicy Chicken had to stop and stand at the door patiently, no matter how anxious she was. After all, the scene in front of her was too strange, and it was hard for Spicy Chicken not to doubt whether this was a trap. Neither Frigga nor Spicy Chicken planned to speak first. One stood at the door of the room with a vigilant face, and the other sat on a chair calmly drinking tea. The atmosphere around the two gradually became anxious with the silence of the two. In the end, Spicy Chicken couldn't stand such an anxious atmosphere because of time and asked first, "You seem to know I'm coming?" Facing Spicy Chicken's question, Frigga's mouth slightly raised a smile, and she didn't even put down the teacup in her hand, but just asked back lightly, "Isn't it obvious that I'm showing it? I believe you haven't encountered any guards along the way." After listening to Frigga's words, Spicy Chicken frowned, staring at Frigga with murderous eyes, and asked, "Are you so confident that I will come?" Facing Spicy Chicken's question, Frigga took a sip of tea and then answered Spicy Chicken's question without any emotion in her tone. "Of course, the other particles that the Dark Elves have been planning for thousands of years are behind me now. I don't believe you won't be tempted." After Frigga accurately said what Spicy Chicken wanted, Spicy Chicken was visibly flustered, but quickly controlled herself, just staring at Frigga without saying anything. He believed that there must be a reason why Frigga made such a big scene, otherwise she would not have waited for him here instead of using guards to drag him to death along the way. Frigga did not hesitate. After taking another sip of the tea in her hand, Frigga put down the teacup in her hand, looked up at Nicki Minaj standing at the door, and said, "Leader of the Dark Elves, let's make a deal." As Frigga's voice fell, Nicki Minaj showed a playful smile on her face and stared at Frigga and asked, "Oh, the Queen of Asgard would actually make a deal with me, a person who wants to destroy Asgard?" Listening to Nicki Minaj's words, Frigga's smile did not change at all, and she spoke calmly. "Nothing is impossible. After all, you know that Odin is old, isn't he?" As soon as Frigga said this, not to mention Nicki Minaj, even Sherlock at the door couldn't help but be shocked. "Isn't this thing better than the Legend of Zenhuan? What the hell is this harem fight?" Frigga's words directly changed the plot to a war emperor's seizure of power! Exclamation mark. Sherlock even unconsciously took out a bucket of popcorn from the library and stuffed it into his mouth. It was wonderful, really wonderful. Compared to Sherlock, who knew the whole script, Nicki Minaj had thought much more. His brain kept working rapidly. After a long time, Nicki Minaj's ugly face finally squeezed out an ugly smile and said to Frigga, "I would like to hear more." After hearing Nicki Minaj's words, Frigga took the teacup on the table and took a sip. She didn't put it on the table again. She said to Nicki Minaj with a smile on her face, "It's very simple. You can take the other particles, but the premise is that you can't harm the girl's life. It's that simple." After hearing Frigga's deal, that didn't seem like a deal. Nicki Minaj's heart was alarmed. He really couldn't think of what benefit this would bring to Asgard. This deal is not so much a deal as it seems that Frigga is collaborating with the enemy without the knowledge of the entire Asgard. Nicki Minaj's brows were almost knitted together, and she couldn't understand why Frigga did this. She looked at Frigga with murderous intent and a hint of doubt in her eyes. "Aren't you afraid that I will harm you after getting the other particles and then counterattack the entire Asgard?" Faced with Nicki Minaj's threat, Frigga gently put down the teacup in her hand. The moment the teacup was put down, Frigga's face seemed to be covered with frost, and it was freezing cold. She looked at Nicki Minaj with murderous intent in her eyes, and even her body was emitting a golden magical light that belonged to Frigga herself. You can try, dear Dark Elf leader. I think you, a person who can endure for 1,000 years, should not make such a stupid mistake. I have already said that Odin is old. Since I can predict your arrival and let you arrive in front of me without any obstacles, then I must have a backup plan. Or do you want to practice with me, Frigga, to see if I'm worthy of being called the first wizard of Asgard? When she said this, Frigga paused slightly, and the coldness on her face instantly turned into a proud expression, with a hint of sarcasm in her expression before she continued. As for counterattacking Asgard, it is even more nonsense. Odin is old, and Asgard has been peaceful for too long. Now Asgard needs a war to consolidate its position, and Asgard's warriors also need a war to gain honor. And I, my friend, I also need a war to consolidate my rights. Asgard can defeat you once, so it is naturally confident that it can defeat you a second time. Chapter 344, Comparison of Acting Skills Between Oscars and Online Movies, Part 2. Sherlock was so excited when he saw the scene in front of him that he almost applauded Frigga. Some of the words he said just now were the scripts that the two of them had discussed, while some were improvisations by Frigga. Don't tell me, with Frigga's performance, the image of a queen of gods who had been forbearing for many years and was extremely ambitious was established, at least in front of Nicki Minaj. Nicki Minaj was also relieved in his heart. After all, according to the current situation, the entire Asgard, including the extremely ambitious Queen of Gods in front of him, should not know the specific use of the ether particles. After all, if these people knew that the ether particles could plunge the 9 realms into darkness, they would never use them for trading. That's right, the Dark Elves once lost the battle led by Asgard against the Dark Elves, but the premise was that the battle was just when the Dark Elves' treasure, the ether particles, had just been created. Before the Dark Elves could use the powerful power of the ether particles, they were robbed by the then God King and his team. The Dark Elves, who were sealed with the ether particles, lost the war. But now a great opportunity is in front of Spicy Chicken. Spicy Chicken can't help but be tempted. The only problem now is actually still on Frigga. In Spicy Chicken's opinion, the woman in front of her is too terrible. She is brave and resourceful. Whether it is wisdom or courage, she is not inferior to the God King who once fought with her. Even in terms of wisdom, Spicy Chicken even feels that the woman in front of her is even higher than the former God King, or even the current Odin. Even if she successfully obtains the ether particles and plunges the entire 9 realms into darkness, under the leadership of this woman, coupled with those weapons that look like firecrackers, Asgard will be a hard bone to chew. Especially those weapons that look like firecrackers. Spicy Chicken has never seen them at all. After all, looking at the entire universe civilization, even if there are firearms, most of them are energy weapons. Chemical energy weapons like those on Earth are even rare in museums. Just like you want to see the Tang Dynasty MODO that once dominated one side, except for pictures, it is difficult to find the real thing. Therefore, Nicki Minaj almost subconsciously regarded the extremely backward firearms in the hands of the Asgard soldiers as some newly developed weapons of Asgard, and was a little afraid of it. After thinking for a while, Nicki Minaj finally made a decision secretly that the woman in front of her must not be kept. But on the surface, Nicki Minaj remained calm and said to Frigga, "Haha, wait and see. But I agree to the deal you mentioned." After hearing that Nicki Minaj agreed to her deal, a touch of joy that was difficult to detect appeared in Frigga's eyes, which was hidden well by Frigga and was not discovered by anyone. After Nicki Minaj agreed, Frigga stood up gracefully, picked up the long sword on the table, and inserted it in front of her, holding the tail of the sword with one hand, and beckoned to Jane behind her with the other hand, motioning Jane to come over. It has to be said that Frigga's acting is very good. If it were on Earth, it would be easy for her to win an Oscar. Compared with Frigga, who played a very ambitious and wise Queen of Gods, Jane's acting is completely unbearable. In Sherlock's words, at this moment, the comparison between the acting of an Oscar-winning actress and the acting of an online movie is huge. It's like a big female lead drama. The first female lead is the famous actress Kate Winslet, the legendary Big Devil Ke Huy, but the important second female lead is an actress who starred in a low-cost online movie. The contrast is too strong, and Jane didn't perform any of the emotions that Sherlock wrote in the script for Jane. In the short few steps from the balcony to Frigga's side, Jane seemed to have just tamed her limbs. The whole person was extremely hard, and there was nothing else on her face except the fear of the unknown. The popcorn in Sherlock's mouth immediately lost its fragrance. My goodness, that book The Actor's Self-Cultivation is of no use to Jane. It's hard for Jane, who has a face of Oscar-winning actress Natalie Portman, to have acting skills comparable to those of the heroines in the online movies in Sherlock's previous life. Although Jane's acting skills are poor, Nicki Minaj didn't notice anything wrong. After all, she and the person opposite her are on different sides, and it's normal for this young female creature to show fear. Just when Jane stood between Frigga and Nicki Minaj, Frigga seemed to be afraid that Nicki Minaj would have some inappropriate thoughts, and once again warned her in a cold tone. Dear Dark Elf Chief, if you have any inappropriate thoughts, I suggest you keep them to yourself, and trade honestly according to the content of the transaction. If nothing unexpected happens, the lady in front of you is likely to be the lover of the next God King, that is, the next God Queen. If you don't want my son, who is full of muscles and impulsive personality, to start a relentless massacre of the entire Dark Elf race after taking office, I suggest you be honest. Oh, by the way, don't think I'm exaggerating. After all, my other son also launched a massacre against the Frost Giants, and everyone in the 9 realms knows about it. Don't forget, Odin is very old. Spicy Chicken Silk only glanced at Jane after hearing Frigga's words, but didn't say anything, but she was constantly thinking about whether her plan was feasible. After all, compared with a crazy God King, and a God King who is extremely calm, and has such a smart woman behind him, Spicy Chicken Silk still prefers the former, to be easier to deal with. Although the Dark Elves led by Spicy Chicken may suffer heavy casualties in the face of such a crazy enemy, with the help of other particles, Spicy Chicken believes that the goddess of victory is still on her side. Frigga, who had no idea that she had done something bad with good intentions, looked at Spicy Chicken across from her coldly, her eyes full of vigilance. Sherlock, who was watching the battle at the door of his room, was so happy that he almost applauded. Look, what is acting? What is domineering? Frigga has now brought a woman similar to the martial emperor to life. In name, Thor ascended the throne after Odin's death, but the power was in Frigga's hands. She put Thor in the open, and she manipulated Thor as the Queen Mother behind the scenes. What is this called? 2 saints are coming to power! Exclamation mark. Damn it. Wonderful. It's really wonderful. The plot that was pulled to the online movie by Jane was instantly pulled back to the level of Oscar by Frigga. Of course, Sherlock did not forget his duty. When Jane stood between the two of them, Sherlock had already put down the popcorn in his hand, picked up his wand, and began to focus on the 3 people of Spicy Chicken. When Spicy Chicken really drew out the other particles in Jane's body, it was time for Sherlock to appear. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 345 Emergency. Spicy Chicken Strips seemed to have not heard Frigga's warning. Although she was constantly thinking about her own little tricks in her mind, her expression remained unchanged. She took out a glass bottle that looked about the same size as a can of Coke from her arms. Then she took out a small handle that looked like it had 4 mechanical claws and pressed it against the bottom of the glass bottle. After a sound of mechanical operation, the thing in Spicy Chicken Strip's hand finally combined into a thing that looked like a wooden handled grenade. With the sound of the instrument starting up, the unknown instrument in Spicy Chicken Strip's hand began to emit bursts of red light, and Spicy Chicken Strips pointed the glass jar at Jane, who was standing between the two of them. The moment Spicy Chicken Strips pointed the instrument in her hand at Jane, Jane groaned in pain, and then black and red smoke began to emerge from Jane's body. The small instrument in Spicy Chicken's hand was like a powerful vacuum cleaner. The black and red smoke coming out of Jane could not escape the small instrument in Spicy Chicken's hand, and was constantly sucked into the Coke-sized can. As the black and red smoke on Jane's body began to increase, Jane gradually floated in the air. On the other side, Frigga also focused most of her attention on Jane. The magic power in Frigga's body was constantly agitated, and she scanned Jane's body again and again with magic power. It seemed that she was afraid that Spicy Chicken would secretly attack her. But in fact, Frigga thought too much. In the early days, when the Dark Elves used the reality gems to create ether particles, they considered the issue of inheritance. After all, the energy of the infinite gems is difficult to control directly even for the most powerful races. Not to mention the Dark Elves who are forced to use the power of the infinite gems. So at the beginning of the design of the ether particles, this thing called the extractor was completed. The leaders of the Dark Elves were not all fools. No one would choose to die generously when they could live. So although Jane looked very painful now, she was actually not in danger of death. But although she didn't have to die, she still had to endure the punishment she should suffer. After all, she had to extract all the ether particles scattered throughout her body. Not to mention the ether particles that were tightly connected to the body. Even if the sweat hairs that were not so tightly connected to the body were to be pulled out bit by bit, the pain was not something that ordinary people could endure. Therefore, Jane's screams while floating in the air were extremely shrill. It was precisely because of this shrill scream that Frigga focused most of her attention on Jane and didn't notice that Spicy Chicken C secretly gave her two guards an inexplicable look during the process of extracting ether particles. The guards who received Spicy Chicken C's eyes could be said to be masters. The tacit understanding they had developed around Spicy Chicken C for many years almost made the two guards understand what Spicy Chicken C meant in an instant. The two carefully took out a short dagger similar to the melee sword in CF from their sleeves, ready to kill the two women opposite according to the leader's intention the moment they got the ether particles. Because they were facing away from Sherlock, and the cloak was blocking them, and the two people's movements were really small, not to mention Frigga who was focusing on Jane. Even Sherlock didn't notice it. What? You said that Spicy Chicken Silk was not worried about Frigga's backhand? Don't be ridiculous. Do you know what the thing in Spicy Chicken Silk's hand that looks like a grenade is? The handle of that thing is actually a syringe. For Spicy Chicken Silk, even if Frigga really has a backhand, if it really doesn't work, she can inject ether particles to resist. At least she can escape from Asgard intact without any problem. Spicy Chicken Silk is absolutely convinced of the power of ether particles and has never doubted the power of the ether particles created by her own people. Soon, as Jane's face became paler and paler, the black-red mist on her body began to gradually change from thick to thin. After the last trace of black-red mist was absorbed into the glass jar by the instrument in Spicy Chicken's hand, Jane's scream stopped abruptly, and she fell to the ground in mid-air, as if she had no bones. Spicy Chicken, on the other hand, covered the lids of the 8 glass jars with his backhand, as if he didn't see it. In less than a breath, the two guards standing behind Spicy Chicken threw the 2 daggers in their hands at Frigga and Jane who were standing aside at the moment when the ether particles were extracted from Jane's body. Frigga's attention was on Jane all the time. Until Jane fell to the ground, she was constantly scanning Jane's vital signs with magic power, so naturally she didn't notice the small movements of the opposite side at the first time. By the time Frigga noticed the action of the other side, it was too late. The daggers in the hands of the 2 guards had already fallen out of their hands. As the saying goes, one step slow means every step is slow. At this time, Frigga could of course use the long sword in her hand to knock down the daggers thrown by the 2 guards. But unfortunately, if Frigga had chosen herself, then Jane, who was lying on the ground now, would definitely have been hit by the daggers without any escape. The most important thing is that the daggers thrown by these insidious Dark Elves are not ordinary daggers. In the war with the Dark Elves, this thing called the Cursed Dagger can be said to have caused serious casualties to the Asgard army. In the end, Frigga's maternal love still defeated reason. With a cry of surprise from Frigga, Frigga chose a path that seemed the most incredible to the Dark Elves. Frigga completely ignored the dagger flying towards her and flew towards Jane, trying to use her body to block this fatal blow for Jane. Everything happened so fast. There may be many words in the text, but in fact, all these things happened in less than a second. Sherlock didn't even react before the dagger stabbed Frigga's stomach. No. Seeing that the development of the situation seemed to have deviated from the script and began to develop towards the plot in the store, Sherlock could no longer sit still. After shouting loudly, he rushed out like a cheetah, grabbing his wand. Chapter 346 Treatment and Thor's Growth. Sherlock was like an arrow shot from a bow, knocking away the 3 spicy chickens who were blocking the door. Sherlock even rushed into the house before the 3 of them could react. Of course, looking at Frigga and Jane lying on the ground, Sherlock felt extremely angry. As he waved his wand, a giant tiger made of dark blue flames appeared between Sherlock and the 3 spicy chickens. Kill them. Sherlock didn't even look back to see what the 3 spicy chickens meant. He directly gave the order to the giant flame tiger, and he squatted down without stopping for a moment to check Frigga's injuries. After receiving Sherlock's order, the giant flame tiger roared and pounced on the 3 spicy chickens standing at the door. It's not that spicy chicken is a loser. When facing the unknown giant flame tiger, he didn't think of using the other particles in his hand at the first time, but subconsciously pushed the 2 guards around him. Because of Spicy Chicken's action, although Spicy Chicken escaped the attack of the flame tiger, the 2 guards who had been following Spicy Chicken were pounced on by the flame tiger's 2 sharp claws. Spicy Chicken almost watched his 2 guards being burned through the chest by the flame tiger's claws in less than a breath, and then being torn into pieces by the tiger's mouth in a few breaths, and then turned into flying ash and disappeared without a trace under the high temperature. Seeing this scene, Spicy Chicken dared not stay and did not care about anything else. He turned around and ran away immediately. Seeing Spicy Chicken running away, the flame tiger remembered the order left by Sherlock, roared and chased after him. As for Sherlock, Sherlock was no longer in the mood to care about other things at the moment. He used magic to carefully pull out the dagger without touching it. At the moment of pulling out the dagger, Sherlock took out a lot of magic potions on the ground and kept pouring them into Frigga's mouth, as if the magic potions were free. On the other side, the magic wand was constantly waving, and one magic pattern after another kept rushing towards the wound on Frigga's stomach. The reason why Sherlock was so nervous was actually very simple, because Sherlock felt the strong dark power and the powerful curse power on the dagger that hit Frigga. This feeling was very similar to the dark power and curse power mentioned in the black magic and the magic theory that Sherlock mastered, but it was still different from Sherlock's magic system. But one thing is certain, that is, both the dark power and the curse are extremely difficult to deal with. Just look at Dumbledore in HP. It stands to reason that as the most powerful white wizard, Hogwarts has inherited nearly 1,000 years of magic research, from black magic to white magic. In the end, wasn't he helpless in the face of Voldemort's curse? In the end, he could only rely on potions to delay the arrival of death. But Sherlock is different. As a person with a library, Sherlock can be said to be educated by the top wizards in the HP world. He not only read Dumbledore's magic notes, but also Grindelwald, Voldemort, and Nicola Mater. Not to mention these modern ones, Sherlock has even read the notes of those masters in ancient times. The ancient magic that can be traced back to the early days of magic, and the more recent ones are masters like the 4 giants of Hogwarts. With these most powerful black and white wizards, Sherlock believes that he can deal with the black magic and curse on Frigga, but Sherlock really has no extra energy to take care of other things. Now Sherlock is like doing an extremely tight surgical operation. There can be no mistakes in the use of magic and the coordination of magic patterns. After a while, Jane, who fell not far away, woke up. Although her face was still pale, compared with Frigga who closed her eyes and was unconscious, Jane's condition was undoubtedly much better. As a player with a PhD, Jane is never a fool. Just by relying on the surrounding environment, Jane roughly deduced what happened here. After drinking a bottle of nutrient solution that Sherlock casually threw over, Jane took the initiative to take over the work of a nurse and began to pour the potion that Sherlock took out into Frigga's mouth under Sherlock's command. With Jane's cooperation, Sherlock felt a lot more relaxed in an instant and paid more attention to the dark power and curse on Frigga's wound. Just less than 10 minutes after the 2 of them cooperated seamlessly, a burst of hurried footsteps sounded in the corridor. Sherlock seemed to have not heard the hurried footsteps and was still concentrating on his operation. But on the other side, Jane's face, which was originally pale, suddenly became even paler. After thinking for a while, Jane finally made a decision, put down the work of a nurse in her hands, stood up shakily, picked up the long sword that fell on the ground, and raised the long sword like a sieve, standing between Sherlock and the door. Fortunately, the hurried footsteps began to shout as they approached the room, which made Jane's body, which was shaking like a sieve, relax instantly. Mother, Sherlock, Jane. Do you know that I was super brave just now and beat the Dark Elf General to the ground? Mom. Thor hadn't finished shouting yet. When he walked to the door and saw the scene inside the house, he immediately changed his tone and rushed in to check the situation. After all, Jane was an Earthling. Although Sherlock's situation didn't seem to have anything to do with the word surgery, it was not much different. Jane knew that she must not be disturbed during the operation, so she almost subconsciously hugged Thor's waist and tried to prevent Thor from disturbing Sherlock's surgery. Despite this, Thor still shouted for his mother louder and louder, as if trying to use his voice to summon back Frigga's lost consciousness. In the end, Sherlock couldn't stand Thor's howling. His hands didn't stop moving at all, but his face was full of impatience. Enough. Thor, if you want your mother to die right now, then just keep crying. Can't you stand up like a man, wipe your tears, and do what you should do? I'm here, I swear with the unique magic in the universe, that I can definitely save your mother. So, even if you don't want to take on the responsibility of the Prince of Asgard, just stand there quietly, and don't make a sound. Sherlock's words echoed in the room like a huge bell, interrupting Thor's crying. Looking at Sherlock kneeling on the ground, the magic in his hand kept appearing like a machine gun, and the girlfriend who hugged his waist and tried to force a smile at him, even though her face was extremely pale. At this moment, Thor's heart seemed to be touched. Everyone seemed to have their own responsibilities and clear goals, but only he, like a child who never grew up, was crying here. Chapter 347, The Different Fates of the European Emperor and the African Emperor. Thor, who had figured it out, did not continue to cry, but calmed down all of a sudden. After a while, Thor seemed to have made up his mind. Looking at the lava in his arms, Thor lowered his head and gently kissed Jane on the forehead, then turned around and left without any nostalgia, but Jane felt that the back figure was cold and cold. Sherlock ignored Thor's departure. Sherlock was still focused on his magical version of the operation. The whole operation lasted for more than an hour, before it was barely over. Sherlock had done everything he could, and the rest could only depend on Frigga's fate. In this more than 1 hour operation on Frigga, not long after Thor left, Odin also walked into the room to see Frigga, who was in the operation. But unlike Thor, Odin did not say anything, but just asked someone to take away the 2 extremely dangerous cursed blades on the ground. He did not talk to Sherlock throughout the whole process, nor did he ask Jane's opinion. Sherlock didn't care about these. The only thing that made Sherlock feel more concerned was the potion he had just poured into Frigga. Logically speaking, just like the act of pouring potion into Frigga, as if it was free, according to the nature of Sherlock's potion, Frigga should not be in human form now. But the magic is here. Not only did Frigga's appearance not change at all, but she even looked a lot younger. This made her feel as if she had suffered an inexplicable insult. So when she was showing off her potion, she had to turn into an indescribable thing, so that when the Queen of Gods was pouring potion, she could take extra care of her, right? Sherlock even suspected that he had a system that he hadn't discovered. After all, the effect of the entry that could see people's dishes was outrageous. If there was really such an invisible big hand controlling this matter, Sherlock swore that he would definitely pull this thing out and beat it up, and then stuff its head into his ass. In fact, it is not that Frigga did not randomly get negative entries, but the magical thing is that most of Frigga's entries are good. Compared with those positive entries, those negative entries are offset by Frigga's positive entries without exception. Such luck is outrageous, no matter how you look at it. Anyway, Sherlock, an African, expressed his envy of the real name system. There is another thing that Sherlock did not know until after the operation. Odin, like in the movie, ordered the closure of Asgard's Rainbow Bridge. After learning about this, Sherlock had to sigh that Odin was indeed old. If it was placed in the past, when Odin was young, Odin would have led people to run and overturned the nest of the Dark Elves. Of course, although Odin is old, Odin still has 2 sons, right? So when Sherlock knew that Thor was missing, he was still very calm, but when Sherlock knew that Loki was also missing with Thor, Sherlock was also confused. After all, although Frigga was in danger and injured this time, she did not die like in the original book. Loki's ability to stand up was beyond Sherlock's cognition. Of course, Sherlock was also very anxious. After all, the final battle was on Earth. As a rabbit, even if the Earth was not good, it was still his hometown. Sherlock could accept everything on Earth, even cursing, but if someone else wanted to mess with the Earth, Sherlock would have gone up and fought hard. However, after all, Loki, the only one who knew how to leave Asgard without using the Rainbow Bridge, had been taken away by Thor to get the goods. Sherlock could not do anything, even if he was anxious, and Frigga was still in a coma, which was not the case. Sherlock thought for a long time, and finally gritted his teeth, and took out a bottle of Felixy from the library for the 2nd time in his life. It's not that Felixir is not good, but this thing gave Sherlock PTSD at once. The last time was when Sherlock just crossed over and used it out of curiosity. Sherlock was really frightened by the entry about fortune and misfortune, and finally Sherlock could only lie at home for 24 hours. God knows what kind of disaster Sherlock could not accept from this exaggerated rule entry. Since then, Sherlock has put aside the Felixy, which was supposed to be the most powerful potion in HP's magic system, but this time, Sherlock had no choice but to gamble. Although he knew that gamblers would not die well, there was Spicy Chicken with other particles staring at the Earth and the 9 realms in front, and Frigga was unconscious. Even though the operation was successful, he was really pushed to the edge. Trembling, Sherlock exchanged for a bottle of Felixy. He held the bottle, which was not much bigger than a carrot, and looked at Frigga, who was lying on the bed, as if she was asleep, with a complicated expression under Jane's puzzled eyes. In the end, Sherlock gritted his teeth and stomped his feet under Jane's gaze and poured the small bottle of Felixir in his hand into Frigga's mouth. Then Sherlock's face began to twist. Yes, it was twisted, the kind of twisted jealousy that caused the plasmolysis. It can only be said that the European Emperor and the Chief are not creatures from the same world. Look at the effect of Sherlock's last use of the lucky potion. Good fortune and bad luck are interdependent. That's a lucky potion. When good luck ends, you have to use bad luck to offset it. What kind of lucky potion is that? Look at Frigga, the European Emperor. Entry: everything is reset to 0. Entry effect: clear all negative states, including abnormal entry effects, curses, abnormal states, etc. Entry time: 23 hours, 59 minutes and 21 seconds. Look, what is the European Emperor? What does this entry effect represent? It means that Sherlock's operation just now was purely in vain. Do you know what everything is reset to 0? Then let alone negative states such as bleeding and coma, even the need to pee is considered an abnormal state. Sherlock once again expressed his jealous plasmolysis. This conscienceless entry must be controlled by some unlucky thing behind the scenes. Sherlock silently wished that the guy behind the scenes would never have seasoning packets when eating instant noodles, and that his children would have no anus. It was definitely not because of my bad luck that I didn't get such a good entry. It was definitely not because of my bad luck. Sherlock would never admit that he was an African. Absolutely. Sure enough, when Sherlock was about to go crazy with jealousy, Frigga suddenly opened her eyes. Chapter 348 Spicy Chicken Shreds, Thor, and Loki. The sight shifted to Spicy Chicken. In fact, Spicy Chicken was not having a good time. She was taking a bath and changing clothes. The reason was simple. On the one hand, the other particles had been taken back, and the injection ceremony was about to take place. It also represented the rise of the Dark Elves, which was a necessary etiquette at such an important time. On the other hand, Spicy Chicken felt that her journey was not smooth. From sensing the other particles to gathering the army to attack Asgard, Spicy Chicken felt as if she had stepped into a script that had been written by someone. For some reason, those barbarians who liked close combat began to use long-range weapons. They finally approached the other particles, but were set up by someone. Fortunately, Spicy Chicken resisted at the end, and the effect was not bad. However, before Spicy Chicken could be happy for long, the giant tiger with a blue flame appeared again. If she had not been more flexible and moved coquettishly, she would probably be like her two bodyguards, with not even a bit of ash left. After finally stepping onto the spaceship, he watched helplessly as a giant tiger chasing him gradually disappeared in reluctance and anger. When he returned to his own territory, he was told that he was the only dark elf who returned on this trip. Fortunately, everything is coming to an end. The dark elves paid so much, and at least they got the other particles. When they plunged the entire 9 realms into darkness, it was time for the dark energy to take charge. According to the tradition of the dark elves, Spicy Chicken Threads took a bath and changed clothes. In the ancestral hall of the main god representing the belief in the dark energy, Spicy Chicken Threads first turned herself into a cursed warrior that only dark elves can become, and then injected the other particles into her body. Unlike Jane, because Spicy Chicken Threads' behavior did not conform to the will of the Infinity Stones, or this direct injection method, the entire right side of Spicy Chicken Threads' body, where the other particles were injected changed, and it looked like it was covered with tumors. The appearance of the Dark Elves, after they became cursed warriors was already unbearable enough to look at, but after Spicy Chicken was injected with other particles, the image was even more unbearable to look at. Those who didn't know thought that it was not other particles that were injected, but zombie viruses. It was with the help of the altar that only half of Spicy Chicken's body was mutated. If there was no altar, God knows whether Spicy Chicken would really become a terrible thing like a licker. However, one thing is certain, Spicy Chicken, who was injected with other particles, has undoubtedly become the center of the entire Dark Elf race. The next step is to hand over the mothership of the Dark Elves, that was built with the efforts of the whole race, to Spicy Chicken, and let Spicy Chicken go to the center of the 9 realms, that is, the Earth, to plunge the entire 9 realms into darkness. What? Why do we need a mothership? Don't be ridiculous. Even if the other particles are made of reality gems, even if the reality gems are infinite gems, they can't stand the dream of the Dark Elves. It's too grand. And even if the reality gems can withstand Nicki Minaj's dream and really make the entire 9 realms fall into darkness, Nicki Minaj herself probably can't stand it. So it is necessary to use some instruments on the mothership as an auxiliary condition. But the good news is that, because the 9 realms are about to overlap, the boundary space of the entire 9 realms has also begun to overlap, so Nicki Minaj doesn't have to travel a long distance to get from the Dark Elves' lair to the Earth, as long as she finds the coordinates. On the other side, Thor and Loki, who hurried, still couldn't catch up with Nicki Minaj. When the two arrived at the Dark Elves' lair, they watched Nicki Minaj driving the huge mothership into a space gate. Fortunately, Thor knew the other side of the gate, London. After the two brothers looked at each other, they didn't hesitate to drive Asgard's spaceship, which looked extremely unscientific, and looked like a canoe, to follow. Well, while Loki would help Thor so much, and how Thor persuaded Loki, is still an unsolved mystery, but according to the later situation, it is nothing more than words like the throne, recognition, etc. Sherlock didn't know what the situation was like here. Now Sherlock's eyes were wide open as he looked at Frigga lying on the bed. The reason is also very simple, because Frigga now has a thing that Sherlock is very familiar with, the cosmic cube. Let's adjust the time a little bit to know what happened. In fact, the matter is very simple. With the blessing of Frigga's European Emperor luck, a bottle of fueling potion successfully cured Frigga directly, and it was even exaggerated that it seemed like she had become an NPC in the game. There was no sleepiness, no fatigue, and even the most basic physiological desire disappeared without a trace. Well, to put it simply, you don't need to eat, drink, or go to the toilet. It's not the physiological you think. Those who think wrongly, go open the browser for me. I can only say that fueling potion is so terrifying that every random entry is an absolute king level entry. After Sherlock and Jane talked about what happened after she fell into a coma, Sherlock also expressed his thoughts. He wanted to go back to Earth. Regardless of whether Thor could beat the Spicy Chicken shreds, Sherlock was very worried about his home. Moreover, as long as he went back, according to his attraction to the ether particles, he could also contain the spicy chicken shreds that absorbed the ether particles. Under Sherlock's request, Frigga began to encourage Sherlock to try using the portal. To be honest, Sherlock really felt that his portal could not reach the level of interstellar travel of the Ancient One, but Frigga always asked Sherlock to believe in himself. After Sherlock's efforts, as expected, he failed. However, the reason for the failure was not because Sherlock could not drive directly to the Earth from Asgard, but because the 9 realms began to overlap, and the space began to become chaotic. When Frigga said this reason, Sherlock had a what the hell expression on his face. After all, from the very beginning, Sherlock believed that those space folds and traps were ghosts with high ether particles. However, according to Frigga, there are reasons for ether particles, but not many. After finally finding out that Sherlock couldn't open the portal because of the chaos in space, Frigga raised her hand with a smile, and with a burst of golden light, the cosmic cube appeared in Frigga's hand. The moment he saw the cosmic cube, Sherlock once again put on an expression of oh my god, but Frigga was not surprised at all. According to Frigga's words, since the space began to become chaotic, it is necessary to find a superior object that can control the chaotic space, and the cosmic cube is undoubtedly the most suitable. After all, no matter how chaotic the space is, it can't beat the space gem. Frigga put the cosmic cube in Sherlock's hand and taught Sherlock how to use the cosmic cube. This time, Sherlock was finally able to open the portal to the Earth normally, but the color of the portal was a little strange. I don't know why it turned into her mother's green, but Sherlock didn't care. After a brief explanation, Sherlock hurried to the battlefield. After Sherlock left, Frigga's face, which was originally pleasant, immediately turned cold. Although Sherlock tried his best to treat Frigga, and the Felicity potion cleared all the negative states on Frigga's body, it is certain that the cursed blade still hurt Frigga's essence. The final result of this incident is that Frigga, who was originally young compared to Odin, is estimated to have a lifespan that is not much different from Odin's. But before she died, Frigga still had some things she wanted to talk to Odin about. Chapter 349, Loki's Flower and the Busy Battlefield. Sherlock didn't know what Frigga and Odin said, but even if he knew, Sherlock didn't care much. After all, it was someone else's family affair. The first thing Sherlock did, after returning to Earth, was to rush to the battlefield. The battlefield at this time should be on a lawn in London. Sherlock didn't know the specific location. What? Why couldn't Sherlock go directly to the battlefield with the cosmic cube? Let the child go. It's the first time to use the interstellar portal. Thank God that I can return to Earth accurately. Still want to locate accurately? The first thing Sherlock did after returning to Earth was to rush to London. After all, according to Sherlock's impression, the mothership of the Dark Elves is really big. As long as he arrives in London, Sherlock will definitely see it. In fact, Sherlock was right. As soon as he arrived in London, Sherlock saw the mothership that looked like a castle. Sherlock immediately used the portal to come to the battlefield. To be honest, Sherlock imagined the situation on the battlefield. From Thor and Loki being suppressed to the two suppressing spicy chicken shreds, Sherlock imagined it. But she never expected that when Sherlock really came here, he would see this scene. To sum it up in one sentence, the idlest person on the battlefield is Loki, the most coquettish one is Thor, and the busiest one is Thor's weapon, Meowhammer. Let's talk about Loki first. Sherlock also observed for a long time, before he dared to confirm, that the person with his big head down, who looked like he was planted in the soil, was Loki. And at this time, Loki, who was planted, certainly did not give up. With only 2 legs above the ground, Loki kicked his legs repeatedly. In conjunction with Loki's usual preference for wearing green clothes, he looked like, well, how to say it? A strange looking but extremely lively Loki flower. Looking at Loki who was struggling with his legs repeatedly, Sherlock felt extremely speechless. All the mages in Marvel had a problem. Obviously, mages should be fragile and the main output unit, but this group of mages just like Gandalf, who likes close combat. You said you are a turret, so you just stand in the back and output honestly. Well, let's say Loki, you learned illusion, and you can't be a turret output like Sherlock, then you just have to be an auxiliary. Sherlock didn't believe it. With Loki's illusion, he wanted to disturb the senses of Spicy Chicken. But looking at the current situation, it is obvious that Loki and Thor were born in the same place. He is obviously a mage, but when he gets angry, he will definitely go up to fight with the two small daggers. Now being planted in the ground to become Loki's flower, Sherlock can be said to be not surprised at all. But after all, they knew each other, and Sherlock finally used the floating spell to help Loki pull out of the ground. But what Sherlock never expected was that when Loki was pulled out of the ground by Sherlock, he didn't think about who helped him pull himself out of the ground. Instead, he angrily threw his hands, conjured up two small daggers, and rushed up with a red face to fight with Spicy Chicken. To be honest, Sherlock had never seen Loki so angry. Loki's face, which was covered with mud, was even bulging with veins because of anger. He looked like a beast that was ready to eat anyone. It was just that Loki looked like a tiger man, which did not change the fact that he was a mage, a fragile one. Looking at Loki, who was about to launch a pig charge, Sherlock had a black line on his forehead. In the end, he reluctantly gave Loki a shot and made him faint, making Loki, who had just regained his freedom, unconscious. How should I put it? You, a melee fighter, should not make trouble. This time you are lucky to become a lively Loki flower. If you are planted in the ground again next time and encounter a stone or something and become less lively, then the fun will be really big. After knocking Loki down, let's take a look at Thor. At this time, Thor and Spicy Chicken Shreds were full of passion. The two hugged each other and wrestled with each other, appearing and disappearing. How to say it, the visual effect looks good. Quite a bit like the feeling of Goku and those powerful people in Dragon Ball fighting beyond the limit of human vision. Although Sherlock also notes that this has nothing to do with speed, it is simply because the space here overlaps. The two hugged each other and fought happily, punching each other. It was so lively, but the Meow Meow hammer, which was Thor's weapon, was in trouble. Sherlock didn't know when Thor threw the Meow Meow hammer out, but looking at the appearance of the Meow Meow hammer in the sky, Sherlock knew that the Meow Meow hammer was busy. When Thor appeared, the Meow Meow hammer fell rapidly from the sky with sparks and lightning, and the whole hammer was burned red due to friction with the atmosphere. But with the disappearance of Thor and Spicy Chicken Shreds, Sherlock seemed to see the Meow Meow hammer spit fiercely, turned 180 degrees on the spot, and then flew out of the sky with sparks and lightning. Then when Thor appeared again, Sherlock saw Meow Meow hammer return and fall rapidly towards the battlefield where Sherlock was. Sherlock didn't know how long Meow Meow hammer had been doing this, but in the short time that Sherlock stood here to collect battlefield information, Sherlock had seen Meow Meow hammer running back and forth several times. Sherlock didn't even know if it was his illusion. Sherlock always felt that every time Meow Meow hammer charged towards the ground, it fell with the idea of punching the earth directly. In the end, Sherlock couldn't bear it anymore. After discovering that there was only Nicki Minaj living here, Sherlock didn't hesitate. He seized the moment when Thor and Nicki Minaj appeared and directly used the cosmic cube to lock the space here. At this moment, Nicki Minaj and Thor could no longer flash around. They could only roll back and forth on this destroyed lawn, punching each other. And Meow Meow hammer finally didn't have to run back and forth. It almost turned into a red light and fell directly into Thor's hands. With the Meow Meow hammer in hand, Thor's fighting power was obviously greatly improved. He went up and hit Spicy Chicken Shreds on the chin with a hammer, knocking Spicy Chicken Shreds away. However, in Sherlock's opinion, this blow was somewhat resentful of the Meow Meow hammer. Sherlock saw clearly that when the Meow Meow hammer hit the ugly chin of Spicy Chicken Shreds, who had become a cursed warrior, sparks appeared because of the great strength and strong impact. Of course, Thor didn't suffer a good fate. After knocking Spicy Chicken Shreds away, Thor seemed to react just like holding a freshly baked sweet potato with his bare hands in winter. He tossed the hammer in his left and right hands back and forth, shouting that it was hot. Chapter 350 on Sherlock's attraction to the reality gems. After Sherlock watched eagerly for a long time, Thor was able to carry his hammer normally. His hammer was lost and recovered, and Thor was so happy that he even kissed his precious hammer under Sherlock's disgusted gaze. Sherlock's eyebrows jumped, and he even felt that Thor and the hammer were true love, and Jane was just a mistress. It was not until this time that Thor, the fool, discovered Sherlock and showed Sherlock a smile that looked very handsome in Europe and the United States, but very greasy in Sherlock's eyes. Neither of them talked about Frigga's problem. After all, Sherlock said that he could cure his mother, and Thor also believed in his good brother, so neither of them talked about what happened in Asgard. However, Thor did explain a lot to Spicy Chicken, who slowly stood up in the distance, especially about the application of Spicy Chicken to the reality gem. According to Thor, Spicy Chicken is not only powerful now, but also has a kind of thing that can release something like a tentacle to attack others. Moreover, the tentacle attack was very difficult to deal with. If Thor hadn't had the Mjolnir hammer to help him resist, he would have been defeated with his physical body alone. That's why Thor chose to fight with Nicki Minaj in close combat. What? Hammer? That was just an accident. He just threw it out by mistake. After listening to Thor's report, Sherlock felt a little unwell. An attack similar to that of a tentacle. Nicki Minaj was holding the reality gem, the most versatile treasure of the universe, and was using a tentacle attack. Sherlock was speechless. Sure enough, facing a dark elves who were so mentally retarded that they only thought about plunging the 9 realms into darkness, they could only think of such a mediocre attack method. Sherlock even dared to swear that even without the reality gem, Scarlet Witch would have played much better than these stupid dark elves. If the reality gem was given to Wanda, Wanda alone would probably be able to wipe out the stupid race of dark elves immediately. Seeing the Spicy Chicken shreds on the opposite side standing up, Thor immediately arranged tactics, with Thor as the front row and Sherlock as the turret output. The Spicy Chicken shreds on the opposite side saw Sherlock's figure the moment they stood up, and they were deeply impressed by this earthling who could summon a giant flaming tiger. At the beginning, because of this damn earthling, he had to perform the king around the pillar in Asgard, relying on his coquettish positioning, and finally escaped from Asgard alive in an extremely embarrassing and shameful way. Now he has met this stinky boy again. When will he take revenge? If he doesn't take revenge now. Spicy Chicken shreds charged at Sherlock and Thor without any hesitation. Thor didn't hesitate. Seeing Spicy Chicken shreds rushing towards him, he also charged in the direction of Spicy Chicken shreds with a hammer. The two of them were like bulls competing for mate sinistrous, roaring and rushing towards each other quickly. But Thor obviously ignored that Spicy Chicken had transformed into a cursed warrior and was blessed with ether particles and anger. Spicy Chicken also ignored Thor, who was blessed with Meow Hammer and had full strength and resistance to blows. In the end, the result of the two people's charge was that Spicy Chicken was hit on the chin by Thor's hammer and flew in the air with sparks and lightning. And Thor was not feeling well. He was hit on the head by Spicy Chicken, who was as strong as an ox with black and red mist all over his body. Under the huge impact, Thor flower bloomed directly on the ground. That's right, Thor was also planted upside down in the soil. Everything happened so fast that Sherlock couldn't even give Thor support or output in return, but it made Sherlock know how Loki was planted upside down in the soil. Of course, Sherlock is not a fool. Since Spicy Chicken has been hit in the air, Sherlock will naturally not miss such a good opportunity. Under Sherlock's sudden brain hole, Sherlock inexplicably recited a spell that should never be recited at this moment. Disarm yourself. As Sherlock recited the spell, a red light flew out from Sherlock's wand and hit the Spicy Chicken in midair with great accuracy. According to Sherlock's idea, even if this magic hit the Spicy Chicken, at most it would have the impact of a spell, just like the Spicy Chicken being punched by someone. After all, the Spicy Chicken did not have any weapons in his hands, so naturally no weapons would be ejected by Sherlock's magic. But what Sherlock never expected was that the moment his magic hit the Spicy Chicken, Sherlock couldn't stop his magic, even if he wanted to. Time seemed to have pressed the pause button in an instant, and a black and red mist emerged from the Spicy Chicken hit by the spell, and then began to spread towards Sherlock at a very fast speed along the red light of the disarm yourself. Then, in Sherlock's horrified eyes, he climbed onto his wand, and then from the wand, he climbed all over his body. In less than a breath, countless black and red mists emerged from Spicy Chicken's body and rushed towards Sherlock along the spell. When the last wisp of mist emerged from Spicy Chicken's body, Sherlock had been wrapped in the black and red mist into a huge cocoon. Unlike Loki, who was powerless, Thor, who pulled himself out of the ground with the help of his muscles and meow hammer, saw such a scene in the first scene after gaining vision, and almost subconsciously thought that Sherlock had been harmed by Spicy Chicken at this time. No. Thor almost subconsciously howled, waving his hammer, and trying to rush up to interrupt Spicy Chicken's spell. But before Thor could shake the hammer a few times, another sound like breaking sandpaper also sounded in the air, abruptly stopping Thor's charge. No. This voice sounded full of confusion, anger, anxiety, unwillingness and other complex emotions. Moreover, Thor was very familiar with the owner of this voice, that was the Spicy Chicken Shreds who had just landed. Hearing the howling of Spicy Chicken Shreds, Thor, who was originally a little angry, was also confused. He looked at the Spicy Chicken Shreds kneeling on the ground, as if his lover had lost his virginity in front of him. He turned his head and looked at Sherlock, who was wrapped in black and red mist like a cocoon. Thor's CPU, which was not very powerful to begin with, was a little slow at this time. So, what should I do now? Looking at the scene in front of him, that was enough to overclock his CPU. Thor asked a soul-searching question. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.